A city burned for 3 days, and the Jedi never came. The cries of the dying echoed through the fractured domes of Corvax Minor, a forgotten colony world caught in the crossfire of a war it never asked to join. It was not a capital. It had no fleets. It was nothing but ash between titans. And in the heart of its final night, a child was born beneath the floor of a collapsed temple. His mother gave birth in silence, her body weak from hunger and smoke. She did not scream, she could not. If the marauders above heard, they would return. Outside, the sky glowed red with orbital fire. Inside, the only light came from a shattered Kyber lantern, cracked and bleeding blue. The Force stirred, but no one listened. No Jedi walked these ruins. No Sith ruled here. It was a graveyard, still breathing. When the child opened his eyes, he did not cry. He simply stared quiet, unmoving, as if he understood something had ended before he began. This was the first memory the galaxy would never know. No name was given to him. His mother could barely hold him. She wrapped him in the robes of a dead priestess, whose bones had already turned to dust. She whispered something he would never remember and buried them both beneath a broken altar hidden from the soldiers, the looters, the Force. The next day, she was gone. The boy did not die. Somehow, he survived, fed by strangers, passed between fleeing villagers, sheltered by those too wounded to speak. He grew up in basements, tunnels, and collapsed monasteries. He learned not from books, but from silence. Not from teachers, but from watching who died first. By the age of 5, he had seen more corpses than faces. By the age of 6, he could steal without being seen. By the age of 7, he no longer looked at the stars. The war above was endless. The Republic and Sith Empire clashed again and again across nearby sectors, pushing the front lines like tides, never caring where the waves crashed. To the Jedi, this was a strategic border. To the Sith, a testing ground. But to the boy, it was home. And home was fire. He saw Jedi only once. A transport crashed near the Outlands. 2 survivors, one wounded, the other panicked. Locals gathered, hoping to be saved. Instead, they watched as Sith scouts descended from orbit and cut them down. The Jedi screamed something about reinforcements. The boy didn't understand the words, but he understood what followed. The lightsabers were red. The smell of scorched flesh was real. He never forgot the sound of the Jedi's voice when she fell, not because it was loud, but because it stopped so suddenly, like a thread being cut. For a brief moment, he thought she had simply disappeared. Like a dream, like his mother. He buried what remained of her near the fields of glass. No one told him to. No one helped. But he did it anyway. Then he sat beside her grave until nightfall, staring at the saber hilt he had taken from the dust. It was broken, but he kept it. He didn't know why. By then, his body was thin, his eyes sharp, and his hands blistered from days spent digging through rubble for food. The Force had not yet spoken to him, not the way it would later, but it was there, waiting, watching, quiet. Like him, they would call him a monster in time, a heretic, a Sith without code or order. But long before he touched the dark side, before he forged his name in blood and fury, he was only a child. One born in fire, and remembered by no one. He learned to speak in silence. The towns he wandered through had no schools, no translators, no unity. Each settlement bore a different accent, a different grief. But war had given them all one common language, fear. And the boy spoke it fluently. He never begged, never asked for help. He simply watched. When someone dropped food, he moved before others noticed. When patrols passed overhead, he disappeared into shadows. He moved like smoke shaped by wind, unnoticed until it choked. In time, the villagers called him Ghost Spawn, not as a name, as a warning. "Don't leave food near the windows," they'd whisper. "He comes at night, quiet as a wraith." But he wasn't cruel. He didn't hurt. He didn't lie. He simply survived. And that frightened them more than any thief ever could. Because by the age of 9, he could vanish in a blink. By 10, he could hear the thoughts people whispered. And by 11, he could burn things without touching them. It didn't happen often, only when he was angry, or scared, or dreaming. But when it did, the air changed. Sparks leapt from stone. Metal groaned. Fires roared in his sleep. He didn't know what it was, only that it was dangerous. So he hid it. And the Force waited. One night, a Sith transport landed near a crater village. Not for conquest, for recruitment. Their envoy wore red and silver, a blade at his hip, and eyes like ice. He spoke of honor, discipline, greatness through obedience. The boy stayed hidden, but others didn't. A girl named Sira stepped forward. She was older, 13, maybe 14, with eyes full of fury. She showed them her scars, told them what Jedi bombs had done to her family, said she would burn the Order to ash with her own hands. The Sith welcomed her, and killed 2 others who tried to follow. "Only one survives the trials," the envoy said as he left. "The rest are fuel." The boy watched them leave, his hands clenched, his heart numb. He didn't understand their rules, only that weakness was punished, and rage was rewarded. That night, he stared at his broken lightsaber hilt beneath the stars. He didn't want to join them, but he didn't want to be forgotten either. The next morning, Republic forces raided the crater village. They were looking for collaborators, anyone who had aided the Sith envoy. They didn't ask questions, didn't pause to listen. They dragged people from their homes, burned the square, executed Sira's mother in front of her. The boy was watching. When the soldiers turned on Sira, something snapped inside him. He screamed, and the air ignited. Flames rose in a circle around him, taller than the men, hotter than plasma. The ground cracked. The sky pulsed. Soldiers dropped their weapons, clutching their heads. And in that chaos, the boy moved. He reached Sira before the fire did, pulled her free, dragged her into the ruins, held her hand until the smoke faded. And when it was over, they ran. Not together, not as friends, just 2 broken children, with nowhere left to go. He never saw her again, but years later, in a fortress above Jagran's spire, he would hear her name whispered through stone: Darth Vader, the Crimson Fist. And he would wonder if she ever remembered the fire, or the boy who lit it. He didn't light it again for a long time, but from that day on, the Force no longer waited. It followed, it breathed with him, and it whispered one truth louder than any teacher ever could. Power is survival. He learned early that no one was coming to save him. The Republic never returned to rebuild the crater village. The Sith never returned to claim it. The people who survived drifted apart like dust caught in weak wind. Some fled to mining outposts. Others vanished into the mountains. But the boy stayed, moving through the ruins as if they were part of him. Every shattered home held a memory he did not want yet, could not leave behind. Every burned street whispered warnings he already understood. Every grave reminded him of something he tried not to feel. Loss was everywhere, and he watched it all. He watched when the plague carts came, pushed by tired medics who no longer looked at faces. He watched when the sky opened with thunder as fleets clashed in orbit, their shadows streaking over the broken land. He watched when the excavation crews found bodies too burnt to bury. He did not cry. He did not scream. He simply observed, because every moment of death taught him something about life. He saw how people clung to hope even when there was none. He saw how fear turned gentle families into predators. He saw how the strong survived not by kindness, but by will. And slowly, without meaning to, he began to understand that he was unlike the others. He did not fear the soldiers who patrolled the outskirts. He did not fear the storms that tore roofs from shelters. He did not fear the dark. He feared only the question that grew louder in his chest. Why had he survived when everyone else had not? One evening, while wandering the scorched plains, he found a transport half buried in sand. Its hull was torn open, its engines cold. Inside were the remains of a Sith strike team slain cleanly, without fire or explosives. Their wounds were surgical, controlled, lightsaber cuts. A Jedi had killed them, and whoever that Jedi was had died only meters away, curled beside the rocks with their cloak wrapped around a fallen comrade. The boy knelt beside the corpses. He did not know their names. He did not know their rank, but he recognized the expression on the Jedi's face. Not anger, not peace, but regret. He stared at them until nightfall, trying to understand why someone so powerful could die so quietly. Why a warrior trained since childhood could fall just like any villager, begging the sky for breath. War did not choose its victims. It simply erased them. He took nothing from the transport except a shard of armor and a small recording crystal. The crystal was damaged, the message inside broken, looping fragments of a Jedi warning about an approaching Sith commander. He played it again and again, listening to the static, the tremble in the voice, the fading courage. He memorized the tone, not the words, the fear beneath them. It was the first time he wondered what a Jedi truly was. Heroes, the villagers once said, protectors of light. But the only Jedi he had ever seen were dead or dying, hunted by enemies who killed without hesitation. If this was the fate of those who defended the weak, what future did someone like him have? He walked for hours, carrying the broken crystal as if it held answers. It did not. But it reminded him of something he could no longer deny. Survival was not luck. Survival was strength, and strength came from power. The more he watched others die, the more he understood that the galaxy did not reward innocence. It did not honor kindness. It did not care for suffering. The galaxy respected only those who refused to fall. And somewhere, in the ruins of Corvax Minor, the boy who had buried a Jedi began to bury the last pieces of who he used to be. Because the war around him was not ending, and soon he would have to choose whether to run from it, or become something it could never ignore. He did not remember the first time he felt the Force move with purpose. Not the small accidents, not the flickers of heat, or the trembling stones. Those were shadows, quiet echoes of a power waiting to be claimed. But there came a night when it spoke with clarity, not as a whisper but as a command. It happened during the harvest raids. Corvax Minor had almost nothing left to give, yet mercenaries descended on the plains each season, searching for scraps they could sell to distant markets. This raid was worse than the others. The men were desperate, hungry, armed with shock batons and old blasters that sparked every time they fired. Villagers hid where they could. Windows shattered, fires spread. The boy stayed in the outskirts, watching from beneath an overturned speeder frame. He had seen raids before. He knew how they ended. Men would take what they wanted. Survivors would rebuild until the next group arrived. But this time, something changed. A child smaller than him ran into the open, a girl clutching a bundle of grain. She didn't scream. She didn't drop it. She simply wanted to protect what little her family had managed to grow. A mercenary struck her with the baton. She fell without a sound. The boy moved before he realized it. The world narrowed. Heat swelled beneath his ribs, sharp and rising. His fingers curled against the ground as if gripping something that wasn't there. The sand trembled. The metal frame above him groaned. And then, the mercenary turned toward him. The man lifted his blaster, a lazy motion born of habit, not fear. He didn't see danger. He saw a starving boy hiding in dirt. The boy didn't think. He didn't breathe. He simply reached. The ground erupted. A wave of force, invisible but immense, blasted outward. Sand lifted into the air like a storm. The mercenary flew backward, thrown into a shattered wall with a crack that echoed across the fields. Others staggered, shouting, blinded by dust. The boy rose slowly, his heart pounding, his hands burning with an energy he couldn't contain. The air shimmered around him, warping like heat above a furnace. His vision dimmed at the edges, but the center remained sharp, focused on the girl still lying in the dirt. He stumbled to her side, expecting the worst. But she was breathing, shallow, weak, alive. He didn't know how to help her. He had nothing, no medicine, no shelter, no words. So he did the only thing he knew. He stayed until dawn, watching over her while the mercenaries retreated, shaken and afraid of a threat they never understood. When morning came, her family found her. They carried her home without looking at him, not out of cruelty, out of fear. They had seen what he did. They didn't want to anger him. They didn't want to thank him either. They simply wanted distance. And he understood. Power changed everything. From that day on, the villagers avoided him. Children hid when he passed. Traders refused to meet his eyes. Even the elders, the ones who once offered scraps of bread, now kept their doors closed. He was alone again. But this loneliness felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. He wandered the ruins with new awareness. The force followed him like a shadow, answering each emotion with a quiet pull. Stones shifted when he walked. Heat flickered when he dreamed. Sometimes, he felt as if the world breathed with him, waiting for him to decide who he would become. But he still had no name. Names belonged to families, to clans, to legacies that stretched across stars. He had none. He was a child of war, shaped by fire, claimed by no one. Yet, power does not wait for permission, and destiny does not need a name. In the silent ruins of Covax Minor, the boy who had survived every raid, every storm, every grave finally understood what the Force had been asking of him. Not to run, not to hide, but to rise, and soon he would. The last time he saw Covax Minor, it was burning. Not in flames, but in silence, the kind that settles after too much death, when even the smoke forgets how to rise. The boy, older now, sharper in the eyes, stood alone on the edge of the plateau, watching the sky turn red one last time. He had survived war, starvation, and fire, but no one survives the Sith forever. They came at dawn. Their ships didn't roar. They hissed low, cold, deliberate. Not the warbands of legend, not the savage legions told in campfire stories. These were clean, efficient, Sith infiltrators marked in black durasteel and silent crests. No banners, no declarations. Just one order: cleanse and claim. The villagers didn't run, they surrendered. The war had taken everything already. There was nothing left to fight for. They laid down old rifles and mining tools and raised empty hands. And the Sith took what they came for. 4 sensitive children, workers, bodies. They measured worth with scanners and instinct. Some were deemed useful, others were not. The boy had no name, no family, no place. But when the Sith commander passed near him, something shifted. The air bent around them just slightly. Enough. A crimson-eyed acolyte stopped and turned. Her gaze narrowed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She pointed. And that was it. He was dragged into the hold of a transport by men in bone-gray armor. His arms bound, his mouth covered. No explanation, no trial. Just the metal door closing behind him as the desert wind vanished. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. But he never looked away. Even when they struck him for defiance, even when they threw him into the pit beside others like him half-starved, half-awake, he kept his eyes forward. Not in hope, not in challenge, but in memory. Because somewhere inside him, the fire was still burning. The ship shook as it left orbit. No one spoke. The children around him cried softly. Some prayed. Others whispered names of mothers, fathers, brothers like charms meant to keep them whole. The boy said nothing. He no longer remembered the names of the dead. And he no longer feared becoming one of them. Hours passed, or days. Time was a blur beneath the hum of engines and the taste of recycled air. When the doors opened again, it wasn't Corvax Minor anymore. It was something colder. Dromund Kaas, a world of storms, drowned forests, and lightning that never slept. The ancient heart of the Sith Empire. A place built not for life, but for obedience. They were not welcomed, they were processed. Inspected, sorted, labeled. Some were chosen for academies, some for labor camps. The weak were discarded, quietly, without sound. A simple nod from a robed official, and a door that led nowhere. The boy didn't flinch. When the overseer scanned him, the machine stuttered. Fluctuations, anomalies, not enough training to define. But something was there, unshaped, unnamed. A shadow behind the eyes. He was sent below, to the mines. Not to train, not to fight, but to break, to serve. For years, each day in the Kaas underlevels began the same, an alarm tone that seared the ears, a meal not fit for beasts, and a descent into the blackness where light died in the stone. There were no stars in the mines, only heat, chains, and silence. But the force was there, not in power, not in strength, in survival. It whispered to him in the walls. It moved with the trembling of the drills. It pulsed when others fell, and he did not. He didn't know its name, but it knew his. The mines beneath Dromund Kaas did not echo. Sound was devoured by heat and pressure, swallowed by the endless pulse of drills that bored into the planet's crust like dull knives. The boy, now older, but still unnamed, labored with others under the rule of overseers who never spoke and never blinked. There were no commands, only strikes. A good slave moved before the whip fell. Each shift blurred into the next. There was no sun here, no seasons, just a cycle of movement, punishment, and rest that wasn't rest at all. The barracks stank of blood and rust. Sleep came in flickers. Pain was constant. Kindness was absent, but still he listened. The force had no temple here, no sanctuary. It lived in the dark, like breath held too long. The boy would close his eyes and feel it moving through the veins of stone, tugging, twisting, aching. Not teaching, not guiding, simply being. He didn't speak for months. There was no need, but others did. A boy from Ord Radama who whispered about Jedi myths before his voice was silenced. A girl with white hair and broken fingers who tried to escape and vanished by nightfall. A half-blind man who claimed to have served Darth Vowrawn, now reduced to hauling carts. Each of them spoke of power, and each of them was taken. The Force remained. He noticed patterns the others missed. When overseers entered the tunnels, he felt them coming before footsteps rang out. When machinery stalled, his breath would catch a second before the gears failed. When accidents happened, he was never near them. It wasn't luck. It was something deeper, something patient. He began testing it. Small things. A stone moved slightly when he focused. A broken light sparked once, then flickered into flame. A tunnel collapse days in the making slowed just long enough for him to crawl free when others didn't. He never smiled. He never celebrated. Because deep down, he understood what it meant. Survival was still a language, and the Force was teaching him how to speak it. One night, as lightning carved the skies above, the guards dragged a prisoner into the lower chambers. A failed acolyte, broken, limp. His face was bruised, his robes torn, but his eyes burned with hatred. The boy watched from the shadows as they chained the acolyte to the same wall he cleaned each day. The man said nothing, but when the guards left, he laughed a hollow, bitter sound. "They throw us away like animals," the acolyte muttered, "even after we give them everything." The boy didn't respond. He kept scrubbing. "You can feel it, can't you?" the man whispered. "The Force, it's in you, like it was in me." Still, the boy said nothing. "They're afraid of us," the man continued, voice ragged. "They train us to serve, but we are more than that. I saw it in your eyes when they brought you in." The boy glanced at him, only once. "You don't belong in chains." The next morning, the acolyte was dead. No wounds, no poison, just gone. But the chains were still warm. The boy kept working, and the Force kept whispering. In the heat, in the pressure, in the silence, he wasn't being punished. He was being tempered, like ore in a furnace. Each day was a trial, each scar a lesson. And though the galaxy had forgotten him, though his name was still unspoken and his history erased, something was changing. Not in the mines, in him. The chains were still there, but they no longer held him. Pain became a rhythm long before it became a lesson. The overseers of Drummond Cass didn't punish out of anger. They punished out of order. Every lash, every shock, every strike followed a pattern that seemed meaningless to the others but not to him. He studied it. He memorized it. He breathed through it. Pain came. Pain passed. What stayed behind was awareness. His body hardened. His reactions sharpened. He learned to move before the blow landed, not to avoid it, but to blunt its force. The guards noticed. They struck harder. And still, he rose. But he wasn't learning strength. He was learning attention. Because every time his mind reached its breaking point, every time the world blurred from exhaustion or hunger or fear, something quiet rose beneath it. A pulse, a hum, a whisper. It wasn't language, it wasn't words. It was presence. He first noticed it during the 11th cycle of the Cass monsoon. Thunder rolled through the mine shafts like distant war drums. Water seeped through cracks in the walls, carrying the smell of ozone and rot. Workers shivered in the barracks, crowded together like animals in a storm. But he sat alone. His breath was steady, his eyes fixed on the stone. The whisper was clearer, now threading through the air like smoke. It didn't come from above or below. It came from within. When he closed his eyes, the world didn't disappear. It sharpened. He felt the guards walking the hall, felt the trembling in the pipes, felt the fear in the workers beside him rising, falling, pulsing like a second heartbeat. And for a moment he felt something else, a presence watching him. Not kind, not cruel, simply aware. He opened his eyes, the whisper faded, but the memory remained. From then on, the pain meant something different. When he lifted the heavy ore sleds, the force moved in his muscles. When the drills shook the tunnels, he felt the echoes before they formed. When an overseer raised a baton, the air thickened just enough to warn him. The force wasn't protecting him. It was preparing him. One day, a collapse sealed the southern tunnels. 12 workers were trapped inside. Screaming filled the chamber as dust rose like fog. The overseers did nothing, just logged the event and waited for the storm to pass. The boy watched the entryway, eyes narrowed. He didn't know the trapped workers. They didn't know him. Their names were as lost as his. But their terror shook him. Not because he feared for them, but because he feared what he felt rising beneath their fear. His heartbeat synced with theirs. His breath matched their panic. Their desperation echoed through him like 1,000 voices crying at once. He knelt, placing his palm on the stone, and the whisper returned. Not faint, not uncertain. Strong. His fingers twitched. Dust shifted around his hand. The vibrations of the collapse flickered in the edges of his awareness, not as sound, but as shape, as weight, as weakness. He saw the break before it happened, saw the path the rubble had taken, saw the one section where the stone was thin, thin enough to move. He didn't understand how. He didn't question it. He stood, walked to the wall, and pressed his hand against the weakened point. The workers stared at him in confusion. The guards watched with amusement. Then the stone cracked. A thin fracture, small at first, then splitting outward as if something inside the rock had been waiting for his touch. Dust rained down. Light pierced the darkness. And from the other side, the trapped workers gasped as air rushed in. The overseers froze. He didn't look at them. He didn't look at the workers. He stared at his hand. The whisper had become a voice, and it had spoken through him. For the first time since Corvax Minor, he felt something close to certainty. He was not meant to live in chains. He was meant to break them. The day he broke the tunnel wall, the overseers did not punish him. They watched him differently after that. Eyes narrowed, steps slower, hands never far from their shock batons. They didn't speak to him. They didn't strike him. They simply observed, as though something dangerous had awakened, and they were waiting to see what it would become. He felt the change as well. The force no longer whispered. It hovered behind his every breath, deeper than instinct, sharper than fear. It moved when he moved. It quieted when he rested. And when anger stirred inside him, it answered like a storm learning its first flash of lightning. But he hid it, because he understood something now. Power drew eyes, and eyes drew chains. To survive, he had to remain small at least until he no longer needed to. Weeks passed. The storms above grew fiercer. The mines shook more often, as if the planet itself were restless. Workers collapsed from exhaustion. Overseers vanished deeper into the complex, whispering among themselves, debating something unseen. Then, one night, everything changed. A convoy arrived. Not soldiers, not trainers, Sith. Ritualists in dark crimson robes, marked with sigils older than the Empire itself. Their boots echoed through the tunnels with a hollow rhythm, as if the stone recoiled from their presence. Workers bowed, overseers knelt. The boy remained still. A tall woman stepped forward. Her face was hidden behind a carved iron mask shaped like a broken crescent. Her voice was low and metallic, shaped through the mask's hollow interior. "Bring me the one who moved the stone." Silence washed through the chamber. The overseers hesitated not because they doubted her order, but because they feared its price. Slowly, 3 of them approached the boy. Their grips were tight. Their eyes refused to meet his. He didn't fight. Not yet. They dragged him before the masked woman. She circled him once, her breath steady, her presence sharp like a blade drawn in darkness. "Untrained," she murmured, "untamed. But there is hunger here." Her fingers hovered near his cheek, not touching him, just sensing. "You are wasted in chains." The boy stayed silent. "But power," she said softly, "is never wasted, not if guided." Her hand lowered to his chest. "Do you know what you are?" He didn't answer. The truth was simple. He didn't know. She tilted her head. "Good. Those who name themselves too early break before they bend." Then she turned to the overseers. "Release him." Their breath caught. One of them stepped back in fear. But the woman's order held weight older than their authority. They obeyed, unlocking his restraints slowly, as though expecting him to strike. He didn't. Not yet. The woman gestured down a side corridor. "Walk with me." He followed, not because he trusted her, but because the force shifted with her presence. The minds were loud, heavy, oppressive. But near her, a strange quiet formed as if the air itself stepped aside. She stopped at a sealed metal gate, carved with ancient Sith runes. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the red symbols for only a heartbeat. "This is the gate of silence," she said. "A test once used for acolytes long before your generation. It opens only for those strong enough to command it." The boy stared at the gate. There was no mechanism, no hinges, no weakness. "Break it." Her instruction was calm, almost gentle, like asking someone to lift a stone from a garden path. He drew closer, placed his hand upon the cold metal, closed his eyes. The force rose. It surged through him like molten iron, twisting with memory of war, of hunger, of pain, of the moment he first learned survival was more than instinct. It pushed against the gate. The metal trembled. Runes flickered. Energy cracked through the seams. The gate shuddered, and then it broke. Not outward, not inward. It collapsed, folding in on itself like a dying star, crushed by a power that had finally stopped whispering and started claiming. When he opened his eyes, the masked woman was watching him. "You are no slave," she said softly. "You are a shadow waiting to be shaped." But the boy felt something else. For the first time in his life, he felt free. The gate behind him was gone, folded inwards, melted by pressure not meant for the living. The Sith woman who led him there never returned. No guards came to stop him. No chains followed. His path ended at freedom, but no one told him where to go next. So he wandered, not as a fugitive, not as a warrior, but as something in between, no longer a slave, not yet a Sith. The transports that ran between the outer colonies and Sith mining zones were rarely checked. He stowed away in silence, slipping between cargo holds and derelict hulls, guided by instinct and the Force. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't need to. He had become invisible not by design, but by nature. The first world he landed on was Iridonia, harsh, volcanic, carved by wind and violence. The Zabrak clans tolerated him, only because they mistook him for something feral. And in a way, he was. He worked in a weapons forge under a blind blacksmith who spoke in riddles and watched with the Force instead of eyes. The boy never gave his name. The blacksmith never asked. But on the last night, when the boy ignited a discarded vibroblade with nothing but thought, the Forge Master simply nodded. "You shouldn't stay," he said. "Fire doesn't belong in other people's homes." So he left. Again, he drifted from world to world, each one further from the Empire's gaze, each one more broken than the last. Ord Radama, where the bones of Jedi temples were picked apart by thieves. Ziost, where the dark side leaked from the stone itself, whispering to madmen in the streets. And Gentes, a frozen moon where stormtrooper armor was melted down for scrap. And silence was safer than loyalty. No matter where he went, the pattern followed him. No one trusted him. No one claimed him. But no one could ignore him for long. The Force moved around him differently. It responded with ease. It answered without hesitation. But it gave no guidance, no voice, no path. There were no Sith Lords hunting him. No Jedi offering salvation. The galaxy didn't see him as chosen. It didn't see him at all. And yet he kept moving. Not because he knew where he was going, but because stopping felt like death. One night, he found shelter in the ruins of an old Republic watchtower on the edge of the Outer Rim. It had long since collapsed, its comm systems ripped out, its banners faded to gray. But in its silence, he dreamed. In the dream, the sky cracked open. A voice called to him not in words, but in pressure, in hunger, in memory. And when he woke, he knew where he had to go. Not because he recognized the place, but because the Force would not let him forget it. Malachor, a wound in the galaxy, a name that Jedi feared and Sith rarely spoke. A world where light had died screaming, and darkness had feasted on the bones of armies. There were no trade routes, no landing zones. But he found it all the same. The ship he stole was old, scarred, held together by rust and will. It broke apart in the upper atmosphere, but he survived the fall, crawled from the wreckage with blood in his mouth and fire in his chest. And when he looked up, there it was, the temple, buried in ash, drowned in shadow, older than any city, any throne, any holocron. Its spires reached like broken teeth toward a sky that did not forgive. He did not hesitate, because for the first time since Corvax Minor, the Force was not quiet. It was calling him home. The air on Malachor was thick, not with wind or sound, but with memory. The kind that lingered after centuries, pressed into the very soil like dried blood. The boy alone, ragged, no longer a slave, and not yet a Sith, breathed it in without flinching. Because this was not a battlefield, it was a grave. The temple stood half buried in black stone, cracked open along the seams like something trying to rise from the dead. Its doorways were shaped like fangs, its walls inscribed with runes no school ever taught. Lightning split the clouds above in silence, as if the world had grown tired of screaming. He entered, not like an intruder, like someone returning to a place that had been waiting. Inside, there were no torches, no lights, just pale green flame flickering through invisible cracks in the floor. The air smelled of dust, ozone, and old fear. Statues lined the walls, hooded figures carved in agony, their faces erased, their hands outstretched toward something that wasn't there. He felt the Force here like he had never felt it before. It did not whisper. It did not guide. It watched. Each step he took was slow, measured. The silence was total. Even his breath seemed distant. He wasn't sure what he was searching for. A master, a weapon, a voice. But what he found was something older. The altar sat at the heart of the temple, sunken beneath layers of volcanic glass and stone. It wasn't raised. It was buried, swallowed by the planet's sorrow. But when he approached, The ground beneath his feet shifted. The altar responded. A hum rose through the floor, deep and cold, vibrating up his spine and into the bones of his skull. Ancient symbols lit across the stone like veins glowing with remembered hate. And then, a sound. A voice. Not outside. Inside. Like it had been waiting just beneath his thoughts all along. You are not the first. He froze. The voice was old. Not a presence, not a spirit, something deeper. A remnant. A scar so profound it could still speak. It did not demand submission. It did not offer power. It told truths. You are not chosen. You are not new. You are only next. The boy didn't answer. Because he knew it was right. The Force had brought him here not to be blessed, not to be taught, but to understand, to see. Visions struck like thunder. Jedi clashing with Sith in the ruins. Lightsabers locked over bottomless pits. A superweapon scream turning armies to statues of ash. A lone survivor, ragged, bloodied, crawling away from the destruction, clutching a holocron and weeping. The past wasn't dead. It was alive beneath his feet, and it hated silence. The boy staggered back, sweat on his skin, ash in his lungs, but his eyes stayed locked on the altar, even as blood trickled from his nose. The Force surged through the cracks in the temple, surging like a tide drawn to something familiar. He stepped forward again, this time slower. He reached out and laid his hand on the stone. It was cold, unmoving, but inside his mind a flood. Thousands of voices screaming at once, teachers, killers, martyrs, tyrants, each trying to tell him what they became, each trying to warn him of what he might be. But beneath them all, beneath the noise and the fury, a shape began to form. Not a path, not a lesson, a forge. The dark side would not give him power, it would shape him through pain, through choice, through defiance. He was not here to be saved. He was here to burn. And Malachor would be the fire. The temple did not teach him. It broke him, piece by piece, and waited to see what remained. There were no holocrons that opened at his voice, no Sith Lords waiting in the shadows to offer wisdom. The Force didn't guide him here to receive instruction. It brought him here to bleed. And he bled often. The ruins were not still. They shifted in the dark. Stone collapsed. Paths changed. One corridor spiraled into a dead end that hadn't been there the day before. Another led to a chasm filled with statues that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. He kept walking anyway. Days passed, or weeks. He lost track of time in the half-light of the temple. He drank from rain that collected in fractured stone, ate what little moss and fungus grew near the warm vents beneath the surface. He did not grow stronger. He grew lean, sharper, heavier in silence. Each day was a lesson in failure. One morning, he tried to lift a fallen column using the Force. It collapsed on him, broke 2 ribs. He dragged himself across the temple floor, coughing blood, laughing without sound. Another night, he stood too close to one of the altar fractures. The power inside it surged without warning. His vision blurred for hours. When it returned, his eyes no longer feared the dark. He could see in ways that had no shape or color, only pressure. He found a blade buried beneath one of the shrines, no hilt, no crystal, just the broken half of a lightsaber shaft still scorched from battle. He tried to repair it using scavenged parts from his crashed ship, but it wouldn't hold a charge. Not because he lacked knowledge, because the weapon refused him. He learned to fight without it. A staff made from obsidian and binding wire became his companion. It cracked bone when swung, deflected small projectiles, but more importantly, it obeyed him. The Force flowed through it, not as energy, but as precision. He could strike without thought, move without plan. His body became the weapon. But training wasn't the hardest part. It was memory. Sometimes, while meditating near the buried altar, visions came again, stronger now. He saw faces he didn't know, battles he'd never fought. Jedi falling, Sith screaming, the floor turning to fire. And always, at the center, a figure alone. He would wake with dirt in his mouth, fists clenched, heart racing. But he never ran. The Force didn't offer him comfort. It forced him to confront the silence in himself. The silence where his name should have been. Where a master's voice should have echoed. Where a path should have formed. He began speaking to the temple. Not in words, but in breath, in focus, in anger. "Show me," he would whisper, standing before the altar. "If I am meant for something, show me." The altar never answered, but the stone around it grew warmer. The Force didn't give him a map. It gave him resistance, and through that resistance he built discipline. Not the kind taught in Sith academies, not the rituals or code, but something simpler, older. Survive, observe, endure, strike only when ready. He carved those words into the temple wall with the tip of his broken blade. Not because he thought they were truth, but because no one else would leave him a teaching. And in the end, it was enough. Enough to shape his thoughts. Enough to sharpen his will. Enough to keep going. He was not a Jedi. He was not a Sith. Not yet. But every breath he took in that temple, every wound he healed without help, every vision that didn't break him, made him something more than lost. Something becoming. He had no name, but the temple remembered him. Not as a student, not as a servant, but as something more rare, someone who listened, who endured, who asked nothing of the Force and yet accepted everything it gave. Time stopped meaning anything. He marked the cycles by the scars on his arms, by the storms above that never ceased, and by the silence that became a companion instead of a curse. He trained alone. Every movement was self-taught. Every meditation was a plunge into memory. There were no sparring partners, only echoes. No holocrons, only visions carved into the walls by pain. He read them with his hands, felt their meaning in the stone. What he became was not clean, not refined, but it was real. One day, while climbing through a collapsed section of the Western Passage, he fell into a pit carved from obsidian and bone. At its center lay a skeleton, a warrior long dead, armor rusted, helmet shattered, a curved hilt still clutched in bony fingers. He knelt before it, not in reverence, not in fear, in understanding. This was not a master. This was a warning. A Sith who had come here searching for power and found silence instead, like all the others. Like every ghost this temple had buried in ash and time. He took the hilt from the corpse. It activated. Crimson light surged from the emitter with a sputtering hiss. Unstable, trembling. It shook in his hand like a beast refusing the leash. But it held. He carried it with him from that day forward, not because it made him stronger, but because it reminded him that strength meant nothing without discipline. He didn't use it often. When he did, it was quick, surgical. He had no one to impress, no one to defeat. Only the temple, only the Force. The Force taught through resistance. The temple taught through pressure. He taught himself through failure. And so he endured, until the visions changed. They came faster now, sharper. Not glimpses of the past, but warnings. The galaxy was shifting. The Sith Empire rising again in secret. The Jedi fracturing. New wars stirring in the shadows between stars. And, through it all, he remained unseen. Not hunted, not followed, forgotten. But the Force hadn't forgotten him. One night, while meditating near the altar, he saw himself reflected in the stone not as he was, but as something yet to come. He wore armor forged from darkness and memory. His eyes glowed with fury. Twin blades burned in his hands, imperfect, red, unstable. Around him, cities fell, armies scattered, and above all of it, silence. The silence he had carried since Covax Minor, since the mines, since the voice beneath Malachor first whispered, "You are not chosen, you are only next." He opened his eyes slowly. The fire inside him had not dimmed. It had grown colder, focused. He had trained without a master, survived without a name, endured without a legacy. But the galaxy would not ignore him forever. He left the temple not with triumph, but with certainty. He walked out into the storm alone. Lightning cracked across the sky. His robes tore in the wind. The blade at his side flickered with red light. He was no Sith. Not yet. He was no Jedi. Never would be. He was something else. Something the Force itself had shaped in silence and abandonment. An apprentice to no one. A weapon with no oath. A shadow walking forward with no promise, only purpose. And the galaxy, though it did not know it yet, would remember his name. The city was already dying when he arrived. Jeddah, ancient, sacred, scarred. A moon that once breathed peace but now exhaled war. The Force had touched its soil for millennia. Jedi, scholars, pilgrims all had left pieces of themselves behind. But the air no longer carried reverence. Only ash. The battle had begun days earlier. Sith cultists and rogue Jedi clashed in the alleys. Republic forces tried to contain the spread, but found only dust where orders once mattered. The streets were chaos, broken stone, shattered statues, and the smell of scorched Kyber. He walked through it unnoticed. Not because he hid, but because even in war, silence could still move faster than sound. He had no faction, no insignia, no master. The crimson lightsaber at his hip was unstable, its blade flickering like flame against the wind, but no one questioned him. Those who saw him assumed he was Sith. Or worse, they were half right. He didn't come to save. He didn't come to conquer. He came for something else, to see if the galaxy remembered how to bleed. The old square at the city's center had become a mass grave. Craters smoked where once Jedi scholars had lectured beneath banners of light. Fragments of stone pillars lay buried in the corpses of soldiers who'd never known why they were fighting. He stood at the center of it all, breathing in the dust, and the Force answered him. It surged through the city like wind through broken glass, sharp, unrelenting, hungry. It fed on fear, on death, on the last thoughts of those who died believing they were right. He felt everything. A Padawan dying beneath rubble, still clutching a lightsaber that never ignited. A Sith commander burning alive, whispering his master's name like a prayer. A child hiding beneath the bodies, trying not to scream. The pain wasn't his, but it echoed inside him, too familiar to ignore. He moved toward the ruins of the Kyber vault. The vault had once been sacred home to crystals used in Jedi initiations, a place of harmony and resonance. Now, it was a tomb. What remained of the vault walls pulsed with fractured light. Inside, the shattered cores of Kyber crystals hummed with fractured energy, flickering like dying stars. No Jedi dared approach. No Sith had succeeded in harnessing them. But he felt something else. An invitation. He knelt beside the broken heart of the vault and reached into the fragments. The Force pushed back, at first wild, raw, volatile. The shards screamed against his skin, cut into his palms, bit into bone. But he did not retreat. He bled willingly. The force surged. The crystals answered not with purity, but with pain. And from their brokenness, he forged a mirror of himself. Twin hilts, forged from scraps and silence. Kyber shards wired into damaged casings. Not elegant, not balanced, but alive. He stood in the vault's center and ignited them both. The blades erupted crimson, violent, unstable. The twin lightsabers pulsed in his hands like feral creatures torn from the dark. They did not hum, they howled, and the city felt it. Outside, both Jedi and Sith turned toward the vault, drawn not by strategy but by instinct. They didn't know what they sensed, but they knew it was not theirs. He stepped from the vault into the lightless air, sabers burning at his sides. And for the first time since Malachor, he spoke, not to the soldiers, not to the Force, to himself. This is who I am now. No name, no order, only blades. And the will to be remembered. They came for him in waves. First, the scavengers, mercenaries drawn by greed, not ideology. They saw his stance, his ragged cloak, the unpolished sabers in his hands. They assumed he was alone. They assumed he was tired. They didn't see the stillness in his shoulders. The first one died before he could fire. The second tried to run. The third begged. Atrius did not hesitate. His blades didn't move like the Jedi's. There was no grace, no posture. They moved like teeth tearing, dragging, locking. Each strike was a refusal. Each kill was a lesson the Force had carved into his bones. Only purpose survives. By midday, his name had not yet spread, but fear had. Whispers moved faster than patrols. A red-eyed man with twin blades. Alone. Unmarked. Cutting through anyone who stood too long in his shadow. The Jedi Council had sent a reconnaissance unit to the Jeddah conflict. Not a full battalion. Just a small detachment to observe and assess. To determine if the chaos was worth their full attention. They arrived near the vault, as the third squad of Sith cultists fell screaming. They saw him there, silent, breathing heavily, sabers still lit. His armor was scorched, his skin marked by burns. But he stood. A knight named Varro stepped forward, hand raised. "You don't have to fight," she said. "We don't even know what side you're on." He didn't answer. Because she was wrong. He did have to fight. Varro drew first, out of caution, not aggression. But the Force doesn't measure intent, it measures will. Her blade met his, and it cracked. The impact of Atrius's left saber fractured the core of her kyber crystal just slightly, just enough. She staggered. He turned, pivoted, and brought his second blade across with a savage arc that shattered her defense completely. She fell. Alive. Barely. He didn't finish her. Not out of mercy, but because she hadn't wasted his time. More followed. A Padawan screamed his way into the fight, filled with fear and righteousness. Atrius parried without effort. He disarmed the boy and knocked him unconscious with the flat of a saber. Then turned to the others. They didn't advance. Because now they understood. This wasn't a battle. It was a boundary. And Atrius was the line they were not meant to cross. He left them there. Not as an act of compassion, but because he wasn't finished. The Sith came next. Not cultists. Not cowards. Trained assassins from the remnants of Exile Khan's old circles. They recognized his technique. Or tried to. "You walk like us," one said. "But you are not marked." Atrius said nothing. "You dishonor the blade. You don't even know the code." Still nothing. They attacked as one, coordinated, sharp, with the precision only bred from doctrine. But Atrius had no doctrine, only experience. They spun through ancient forms. He broke them with pressure. They counted on rhythm. He gave them chaos. And in minutes, the last one collapsed at his feet, coughing blood, eyes wide. "What are you?" the Sith choked. Atrius looked down at him, lightsabers dimming. "Not yours," he said. The last word the dying man heard, before silence. By dusk, the sky above Jeddah glowed with unnatural light. The storm above the vault pulsed red. Rumors spread far beyond the city. Republic agents logged it. Sith warlords dismissed it. But those who had stood there, those who had seen the twin sabers, never forgot. A man with no name, no master, and no mercy. Atrius. The name began to surface low and quiet, but rising. And the Force, watching from beneath the fractured stones, stirred again. Because now, the galaxy was watching too. Night settled over Jeddah like a shroud. The fires dimmed, the screams faded, but the tension in the air did not ease. It thickened, spreading through the ruins as if the city itself understood that something unnatural had awakened within its walls. Atrius walked alone through streets carved from ancient stone. His twin blades were sheathed, but their violent glow still flickered faintly against the metal of his belt. The people he passed, pilgrims, soldiers, scavengers, gave him space. Some stepped aside, others hid behind fallen columns. A few simply watched him with hollow eyes, unsure if he was salvation or doom. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He knew what they saw. A stranger who fought like a Sith. A wanderer who spared like a Jedi. A warrior who belonged to neither. It was the first time he realized he had no banner, and the galaxy had no place for those without one. At the edge of the market ruins, he stopped. An old monument lay shattered in the dust, a Jedi sculpture, once tall enough to guide pilgrims across the moon. Now only the upper half remained. Its face was cracked, its hand reaching toward the sky as though begging for light that would never return. He stood before it, silent. He had seen Jedi die. He had watched Sith fall. If either side held truth, he had never found it. The wind carried distant footsteps, soft at first, then growing. Not soldiers, not cultists, something steadier, disciplined. He turned just as a small formation emerged from the shadows. They wore no armor, no capes, only dark travel robes and expressions shaped by long journeys. Not Jedi, not Sith, guardians of the wills. The eldest among them stepped forward, leaning on a staff etched with prayer lines worn smooth by decades of use. His eyes were calm, but heavy with grief. "You are the one who shook the vault," the elder said. Atrius didn't answer. He watched the man's stance, balanced, grounded, but unarmed, a deliberate choice. "We do not seek a fight," the elder continued, "but neither can we ignore you." The others positioned themselves behind him, forming a circle of quiet vigilance. They did not radiate fear, only duty. "Why are you here?" the elder asked. Atrius looked past him, toward the sky, toward the drifting embers that still lingered after the day's violence. "I followed the Force," he said. A truthful answer, the only one he had. The elder studied him, gaze lingering on the scorched metal of his lightsaber hilts. "The Force does not always lead," the man murmured. "Sometimes it warns." Atrius didn't respond. The elder sighed. "Do you understand what happens now? Both the Jedi and the Sith will come for you. Not out of hatred, out of fear. A man without a master threatens every order." "I don't want their wars," Atrius said softly. "That does not matter. You changed the path the moment you lifted those blades. Silence settled again. Deep, cold. The kind that lingered when fate began to shift. One of the younger guardians stepped forward, anger in his eyes. He slaughtered dozens today. Jedi, Sith, he doesn't care who bleeds. Atrius didn't deny it. Because it was true. The elder raised a hand, stopping the younger guardian. War shapes people into weapons before they understand what choice is. He turned back to Atrius. You have power, great power. But power without purpose becomes poison, even to the one who wields it. Atrius lowered his gaze. He had heard those words before, not spoken aloud, but carved in every ruin he had walked through since childhood. The elder bowed his head. Leave Jeddah before dawn. Spare this moon any further weight. Atrius stepped back, unsure whether he had just been warned or forgiven. He walked away without speaking. No allegiance, no doctrine, no master, only the Force following him like a long shadow. He left the city before dawn, not because the Guardians had warned him, not because the Jedi would return. He left because the Force felt different now, sharper around the edges, as though something had awoken inside him that the world was not ready to face. Jeddah's sands were cold beneath his feet. The wind carried the faint glow of distant fires, the last breaths of a battle that would be forgotten by history. But the memory of what he had done here would not fade. He crossed the silent valley beyond the Kyber vault, where broken statues lay half buried in dust. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the ruins in pale gold. But even light could not chase away the shadows that followed him. Every step he took, he felt eyes watching him. Not from people, from the Force itself. Something in it had changed. It didn't whisper caution. It whispered consequence. He paused at the edge of an old causeway, where ancient stone cracked beneath his boots. The air shifted. The ground trembled, and a single figure stepped out from behind a collapsed pillar. A Sith, not a cultist, not a scavenger. A true Sith knight, armor gleaming black, mask shaped like a silent scream, a double-bladed lightsaber held loosely in one hand. The knight spoke through a filtered growl. Atrius, hearing his name spoken aloud, felt strange, heavy, like a chain he had never agreed to wear. Word travels fast, Atrius said quietly. You killed our acolytes, the Sith replied. You humiliated our assassins. You fight with our weapons. And yet, the knight tilted his head. You kneel to no one. Atrius didn't move. You have two choices, the Sith continued. Join us or die here. Atrius breathed in slowly. The wind stilled, as if waiting. I don't follow masters, he said. The knight ignited his saber. Atrius ignited both. The valley lit in red. The duel began with violence, not testing strikes. The Sith pressed forward with practiced precision, spinning, sweeping, thrusting with the confidence of someone raised on doctrine. Atrius met each attack with unpredictable ferocity. He didn't follow forms. He didn't honor stances. He fought the way he had lived, untrained, unbound, unmerciful. The Sith's blade sang through the air. Atrius's twin sabers answered with snarling crackles, unstable and wild. Sparks fell like blood-red snow. Stone shattered beneath their feet. For a moment, they were equals. But Atrius did not fight to prove himself. He fought because he had been challenged. He shifted his weight, crossed his blades, and trapped the Sith's staff between them. With a twist fueled by instinct rather than knowledge, he broke the knight's grip, sending the double blade skittering across the ground. The Sith lunged barehanded, desperate. Atrius struck once, a clean, final arc across the chest. The knight fell to his knees, armor smoking, breath fading behind the mask. "You could have been great," he rasped. Atrius looked down at him, sabers dimming. "I will be," he said, not as a boast, as a truth the Force had already seen. The Sith collapsed. Silence returned. Atrius turned away but stopped as he felt something shift behind him. Not movement, meaning. The Force rippled outward, carrying the echo of this death across Jeddah, across the conflict, across the stars themselves. And in that ripple, a message. His name, spoken not in fear, not in reverence, but in warning. Atrius. It spread through Sith ranks as a threat, through Jedi circles as a mystery, through soldiers and civilians as a shadow they hoped never to meet. He didn't celebrate, he didn't smile, he didn't feel pride, he simply walked on, twin sabers humming quietly at his sides. A name etched in fear, a legend born without permission, and a force the galaxy could no longer ignore. Because Atrius had awakened, and the dark was listening. The ship that carried him to Coraban was stolen. Its codes were old, its hull was fractured, its fuel nearly gone. But it flew, and the planet accepted his arrival without resistance. Coraban had seen thousands like him before. Acolytes, pretenders, ghosts. Most never left. The sky above was low and red, painted in rust-colored clouds that never moved. Twin suns burned behind the haze, casting long shadows over the jagged ridges and broken temples. The wind howled through forgotten statues like an ancient breath, still mourning the dead. But Atrius did not come to mourn. He came to challenge. No one greeted him. There were no sentries guarding the old roads. The Sith Academy, long dormant, watched in silence from the cliffs above its halls carved from the bones of the mountain itself. The valley below was filled with tombs, kings, lords, betrayers. He stepped down into it without hesitation. The Valley of the Dark Lords had become quiet in recent years. The Sith Empire fractured. The academies purged. Those who remained served quietly in exile, clinging to ancient doctrines while waiting for a new master to rise. Atrius didn't wait. He walked into the valley not as a student, but as a rival. The first to confront him was not a warrior. It was a historian, a robed scholar standing at the mouth of the tomb of Malachor Ragnos, startled to see someone walking alone, unannounced, with twin sabers strapped to his side, and a presence that bent the dust around his feet. "You don't belong here," the man said, voice firm but cautious. Atrius said nothing. "You're not of the academy," the scholar continued. "And if you came to take what's buried, know that the tombs are sealed by blood." "I didn't come to take," Atrius replied. The scholar blinked. "Then why?" "I came to ask why they stayed buried at all." That was the last question the man ever heard. The twin sabers ignited without ceremony. The scholar died without understanding, not out of cruelty, but because Atrius had no time left for those who served dead voices. He moved deeper into the valley, through the tomb of Tulak Horde, where echoes of blade rituals still clung to the walls, past the crypt of Ajunta Pol, whose resting place hummed with the sorrow of exile, to the silent gates of Naga Sado's lair, sealed by mechanisms older than memory. He passed them all, not to plunder, not to prove, but to remind the dead they had been replaced. At the edge of the valley, he stood before a fractured monolith once used by Sith Lords to mark their ascension. The engravings had faded, the names eroded by centuries of wind. Only silence remained. Atrius raised his hand and dragged one of his sabers across the stone. Sparks flared, metal burned, and for the first time, A name was carved where none had dared place it. Not above the others, not beneath them. Across them, Atrius, a name that was never spoken in Sith halls. A name unblessed by ritual. A name unwanted by tradition. He left the mark glowing, not as a declaration of power, but as a warning. The Sith Lords had ruled in temples, in shadows, in blood. But they had forgotten something. The greatest danger to a legacy is not its enemies. It is the one who does not want to inherit it. The tomb of Naga Sado did not open for him. It groaned, it trembled, it hissed with ancient mechanisms that had killed hundreds of acolytes over the centuries, but it did not yield. The stone doors remained sealed, pressed shut by layers of alchemy, blood rituals, and the will of a lord long dead. Atrius stood before them, breathing slowly. Most Sith would have taken this as a sign, a warning, a test not meant for them. But Atrius felt something else. Rejection. The force here was heavy, steeped in ambition, betrayal, and visions of conquest buried beneath layers of sand. It sensed him. It measured him. It pushed him aside like an unworthy child, standing at a table meant for kings. He pressed his hand against the door, cold, silent, unmoving. In the minds of Dromund Kars, stone had yielded beneath his touch. On Malachor, the altar had responded with violent hunger. But here, the tomb denied him not because he lacked strength, but because he lacked permission. And Atrius had never bowed to permission. He stepped back, igniting one of his unstable blades. Red light bathed the walls, dancing across carvings of Sado's ancient victories. He struck once. Stone cracked but did not break. He struck again, harder. Sparks flew. Dust shook loose. But the door remained intact. Sith acolytes, watching from the cliffs above, began to laugh. Another fool, one called. He thinks brute strength opens what only lineage can. He bleeds for a tomb that doesn't want him. Atrius listened. He didn't look up. He simply deactivated his blade. Then he walked away. Not in defeat, but in clarity. The tomb didn't reject him because he was unworthy. It rejected him because it followed rules he had never agreed to follow. He turned toward the valley again, toward the smaller tombs, those unguarded, forgotten, left to collapse under centuries of wind. These were not monuments to power. They were graves to failure. He entered one at random. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Bones lay scattered across the floor. A rusted sword leaned against a crumbling wall. A shattered holocron pulsed faintly, its pieces flickering with dying fragments of thought. Atrius knelt beside it. A voice crackled from the broken crystal, weak, fragmented, desperate. Failed. Master struck me down. Betrayal. Should have seen. He listened to the dying echo, feeling the fear beneath its words. This was not a great lord, not a conqueror. This was a servant who died hoping his master might look back. Atrius closed his hand around the holocron shard. It crumbled to dust. He stood and moved deeper. Another tomb. Another failure. Another echo of pain sealed behind stone. The Sith Order had been built on triumph, but it had been maintained on corpses. The deeper he went, the more he understood. These tombs were not monuments to power. They were excuses. Excuses to keep the living in chains. Excuses to claim that only the chosen could rule. Excuses to hide weakness beneath centuries of ritual. He exited the final tomb as the twin suns dipped lower in the sky, casting the valley in deep red shadows. The acolytes who had mocked him earlier still watched from above. One called out again, "Find anything worth kneeling for." Atrius didn't raise his voice. "Kneeling is why your masters lie buried." The laughter stopped. He walked to the center of the valley, where ancient Sith had once dueled for the right to ascend. The ground was cracked from generations of blood, dark and hardened like volcanic glass. Atrius drew both sabers. "I am not here to open your tombs," he said. His voice carried through the valley like a slow blade. "I am here to prove they no longer matter." He stabbed both sabers into the earth. The ground shook, dust rose, stones trembled, cracks spread across the valley floor like veins. The ancient runes carved into the monoliths flickered weakly, resisting the disturbance of a man who did not belong to their hierarchy. Acolytes panicked, some fled, others watched in fear. Atrius stood unmoved. The tombs had denied him their legacy, so he would build his own, one that required no permission. Night fell slowly over Coraban, as if even the darkness hesitated to touch a world built on so many graves. The acolytes had retreated to the cliffs, whispering among themselves, shaken by what Atrius had stirred. Not a victory, not a ritual, something far more dangerous. A denial. Atrius sat alone in the ancient dueling circle, the cracked earth warm beneath him. His sabers lay crossed beside him, their red cores dimmed, humming softly like creatures at rest. The valley wind carried the faint rattle of sand against stone. He closed his eyes. The force here felt different than on Malachor. It was not hungry. It was not wounded. It was expectant, like a teacher waiting for a student who never arrived. He felt the presence of the old lords, not their spirits, but the shadows of their ambition carved into the land itself. He listened. For hours, he listened. The echoes that drifted through the valley were familiar. Commands, threats, decrees spoken across centuries. Sith Lords proclaiming codes, rewriting doctrines, declaring their truth as the only truth. Power must be earned, power must be taken, power must be passed down. All of it sounded the same. All of it felt empty. He opened his eyes again. "What did you build?" he whispered into the darkness. "Walls, tombs, statues. Is that all your power became?" The wind answered with silence. Atrius rose slowly, lifting one of his sabers. The blade ignited unstable, flickering, red light reflecting off the valley walls. He held it before him, studying its trembling shape. It was imperfect, wild, dangerous, but alive. He tightened his grip. "This," he said softly, "is not strength. It is expression." The doctrine he began to form was not spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. It shaped itself in the rhythm of his breath, the tension in his stance, the memories burned into him by war, by mines, by Malachor. The Sith prized knowledge, but hid it behind gates. They prized power, but chained it to hierarchy. They prized legacy, but trapped their greatest teachings in tombs. Atrius had no patience for any of it. Strength, he knew, was simpler: to destroy what must fall, to endure what cannot break, to become something the galaxy could not control. He walked through the valley with slow, steady steps. The sabers remained lit at his sides, their red glow painting the stone in streaks of fire. He approached the shattered monolith where he had carved his name earlier. The carving was crude, uneven, but real. He placed his hand over it, not to admire it, not to claim anything, but to make a promise. "I will not follow your rules," he said quietly. "I will not kneel in your halls. I will not learn from your dead." The tombs watched in silence. "I will show the galaxy what a Sith becomes without a master." A sound echoed behind him, footsteps. He did not turn. An acolyte approached slowly, hands shaking, hood lowered. A young woman, barely more than a child, with fear in her eyes and a training saber clutched too tightly in her hands. You spoke against the Lords, she said. Against everything we're taught. I spoke the truth, Atrius replied. They'll kill you, she whispered. Atrius finally turned to face her. Then let them try. The girl stepped back, trembling. You don't understand the Sith code. He cut her off with a tilt of his head. The code is a prison written by those who feared what they could not control. Her breath caught. And what do you follow? She asked. Atrius looked at his sabers, their red light flickering across his face. Nothing, he said, except what must be destroyed. He walked past her without waiting for a response. The girl watched him disappear into the valley shadows, unsure if she had spoken to a heretic, or the first Sith she had ever met who was truly free. Word spread quickly through the valley. A stranger had entered the tombs, a man with twin crimson blades, a warrior who bowed to no lord and obeyed no master. The acolytes whispered his name like a warning. The overseers called him a disruption. The archivists marked him as a heretic. Atrius walked through their fear without slowing. He did not threaten them. He did not challenge their hierarchy. He simply refused to participate in it. And that alone made him dangerous. At the entrance of the old academy, 2 guardians blocked his path, Sith warriors draped in heavy armor, alchemical plating fused to their skin. They lowered their spears, crossing them before him. No one enters without sanction, one said. Atrius didn't draw his blades. He only looked at them, eyes steady, posture calm. The wind carried sand across the stones, whispering through the hollows of ancient helmets mounted nearby. I'm not here to enter, he said. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Then why stand before the academy? The other asked. Atrius stepped closer, close enough for the red glow of the setting suns to sharpen the angles of his face. To remind you that power does not live behind doors. The first guard lifted his spear. You disrespect the Lords. Atrius shook his head. No, I disrespect those who hide behind their names. The second warrior lunged, striking fast, too fast for most acolytes to track. But Atrius moved before thought, before instinct, before the Force even needed to warn him. He slipped past the blow, placed a single palm against the warrior's chestplate, and pushed. The man flew backward, crashing against the academy wall with such force that the stone cracked. The other guard hesitated, fear unraveling discipline. Atrius did not raise his blades, did not strike again. He simply turned away. I'm done speaking to statues, he said quietly. He walked into the valley alone, leaving the guards staring after him, shaken by the realization that he had defeated them without needing to ignite his sabers. The deeper Atrius traveled into Coraban's heart, the more he felt the planet reacting to him. Not resisting, not rejecting, assessing. It weighed his past, his scars, his hunger, his defiance. It pressed against the edges of his mind. It searched for weakness. But it did not find the kind it understood. Near the tomb of Ludo Kresh, a group of acolytes finally approached him openly. Their leader, tall and thin with tattoos covering his scalp, stepped forward. His voice trembled between anger and awe. What are you trying to prove? Atrius studied him for a long moment. That your order has forgotten what fear is. The acolytes tensed. Some reached for weapons, others stepped back. Atrius continued. You kneel to the dead. You recite their words. You mimic their rituals. But none of you understand why the galaxy once trembled at the name Sith. He gestured toward the tombs around them. These walls do not make you powerful. They remind you that every one of your masters died. The leader's voice shook. You think you're better. Atrius shook his head. No, I think I am free. He turned away and began walking again. But the leader's patience broke. Rage filled his face. He ignited his saber and charged, shouting a battle cry meant to echo through the valley. Atrius didn't even turn fully around. His right blade snapped to life with a violent hiss, meeting the acolyte's strike midair. His left blade ignited an instant later, swinging low. A single motion. Clean. Final. The acolyte fell before he understood he'd been beaten. Silence followed. Fear settled over the others. Atrius extinguished his sabers. "I don't want followers," he said. "I don't need witnesses." He walked away from them, leaving only the echo of his footsteps in the cold Coraban dust. A heretic, a rebel, a Sith without a master. He had no throne, no doctrine carved in stone, no legacy shaped by those who came before. He had only his will. And in the galaxy that was beginning to whisper his name, will was enough to reshape everything. She didn't fall from the sky. She walked out of it. Atrius first saw her on the scorched surface of Arjuna 9's, a forgotten moon stripped bare by orbital fire decades earlier. What remained was silence, heat, and dust that never settled. He had come there to vanish, to hide from the names that hunted him across space. But the Force had other plans. She moved like someone who had once worn purpose. Her robes were scorched but shaped by design. Her lightsaber was broken, its emitter cracked, hanging at her side like a memory she couldn't put down. Her hair was braided the way Jedi once taught, loose at the ends, tight at the base, a ritual half abandoned. She wasn't a Sith, and she wasn't a Jedi. Not anymore. She found him near the wreckage of a downed Republic transport, where Atrius had been salvaging scrap for repairs. He saw her before she saw him, watched her kneel beside a body half buried in ash, remove a pendant from its chest, and whisper a name he didn't recognize. She wasn't afraid, not of the dead, not of the silence, and not of him. When she finally noticed him, she didn't ignite her saber. She didn't ask who he was. She only asked one question. "Did you know them?" Atrius shook his head. "No." She nodded, as if that answer made something easier. "Then help me bury them." They said nothing else that night. No names, no reasons. Only the sound of ash being pushed into the earth. It wasn't until the second day that he learned her name. Ceres. She said it simply, without ceremony, as if she didn't expect it to matter. But it did. It echoed inside him in a way most names didn't. Like a whisper that had finally been given a voice. She spoke little of her past. A Jedi Knight once. Exiled. Not for betrayal. Not for failure. But for walking away. She had seen her master fall in a conflict. Atrius had only heard rumors of an ambush above Brental, orchestrated by Sith agents posing as diplomats. Ceres had defied the Council's orders and stayed behind to protect civilians during the retreat. They called it disobedience. She called it conscience. He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer it. They survived together for weeks in the ruins, scavenging, avoiding patrols, and training in the open under the red light of Arjuna's dying sun. Not as master and apprentice, not as rivals, as something neither had ever been allowed to become. Equals. Her presence in the Force was different than his. Softer, focused. She moved with restraint, always holding something back. Atrius didn't understand it at first, but over time, he saw what it was. Fear, not of him, of what would happen if she let go. And still, she stayed. Even as Sith bounty ships scanned the outer ranges, even as rumors of a growing war spread through off-world channels, even as Atrius sharpened his blades in the dark, preparing for a conflict he could feel building far beyond the horizon. Ceres remained. She didn't ask him to stop. She didn't ask him to follow her path. She simply stood beside him when the nights turned cold and the Force felt too quiet. And in that stillness, without warning, something began to grow. Not desire, not ambition, but closeness. A tether, unspoken, fragile. The kind of bond the Jedi feared, the kind the Sith twisted. But neither Atrius nor Ceres wanted to own each other. They just didn't want to be alone. They never called it training. There were no ranks between them. No teachings handed down with authority, just two survivors in exile, passing knowledge back and forth like water shared between wanderers. Atrius had never known the Jedi way. Ceres had never seen the dark side up close. What grew between them was not agreement, it was curiosity. And curiosity, when not poisoned by fear, becomes understanding. Their first sparring session began in silence. No rules, no markers, just movement. Ceres struck with clean, graceful arcs, her style measured, refined by years under the discipline of the Jedi Temple. Atrius countered with aggression sharpened by instinct. He was faster, she was steadier. They fought like people who weren't trying to win. They fought like people trying to learn. Afterward, they sat in the shadow of a fallen transport, sweat clinging to their skin, breath shallow from exertion. "You fight like the Force owes you something," she said. Atrius didn't reply. "And yet," she added, "you never overreach." He stared at the cracked earth. "Because it doesn't owe me anything." She didn't press him. Instead, she showed him something. Not a technique, not a form. A meditation. Simple, quiet, stillness in the Force. "Not all power comes from rage," she whispered. They sat in silence for over an hour, eyes closed, minds open. The wind passed. The ruins settled. Atrius didn't fall into peace, but he felt the edge of something close to it. When he opened his eyes, she was watching him. "You were listening," she said. "I don't ignore what works." That night, he returned the gesture. He led her to a plateau above the ruins, where he practiced alone with his blades. There, beneath the stars, he showed her how to fight without pattern, without hesitation, how to read intent before motion, how to move through fear instead of around it. She watched closely. And when he finished, she nodded once. "That's not power, that's survival." He didn't argue, because she was right. But she had missed something. "It's both," he said. She looked at him carefully, as if seeing him again for the first time. From then on, they trained together every day. Not as enemies, not as allies, as witnesses to each other's pain. They spoke more openly now. Not often. But when they did, it mattered. She told him about the temple, how it taught children to feel only one side of themselves and deny the rest. How even compassion had been turned into a rule, not a choice. He told her about Malachor, and how the Force there had not spoken, it had screamed. She didn't flinch when he said it, she only listened. That became their quiet agreement. No judgment, no apologies, only truth. He asked her, once, if she ever missed the Jedi. She hesitated. "I miss what I thought they were," she said, "before I learned what they feared." "And what do they fear?" he asked. She looked at him, soft and steady. This. She didn't mean the sabers, or the exile, or the buried temple ruins they lived among. She meant closeness, vulnerability, the idea that someone like her could let someone like him inside the space the Jedi were taught to guard. He didn't speak, he didn't need to, because the Force between them no longer felt cold. It felt quiet. and alive. They sat together that night beside a rusted engine, its core long dead, watching the stars drift slowly across the black. No words passed between them. No vows. No declarations. Just breath. And something unspoken. A bond the Force didn't name, but would remember. Love wasn't something either of them named. Not at first, not aloud. It grew the way fire grows in dry grass, quietly, slowly, unnoticed, until the light becomes impossible to ignore. The Force shifted around them in ways both strange and gentle, like a tide that had finally found the shore it had been reaching for. On Arjuna, nights were long. The cold was merciless, and silence became a kind of blanket they shared. Ceres often sat close to him beneath the wreckage of their shelter, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes reflecting distant starlight. Atrius never pulled away. He didn't know how to invite someone in, but he knew how to stop pushing them out. One night, as the wind howled over the broken ridges, she broke the quiet. "A Jedi isn't supposed to feel this," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "So don't call it that." She laughed just once, a sound like something fragile remembering how to live. "It doesn't matter what we call it," she whispered. "We both know what it is." Atrius said nothing, but the stillness in him shifted. A memory of Malachor flickered through his mind of voices, warning him that attachments were weakness, distractions, chains. But sitting beside Ceres felt like the first moment in his life that didn't require strength. It required honesty, and that frightened him more than any Sith Lord ever had. Days turned into weeks, the bond grew deeper. She would touch his wrist when he grew too quiet. He would steady her shoulders when nightmares woke her. They moved in sync during training, as if the Force had tuned their bodies to the same rhythm. But the closer they became, the louder the danger grew. Ceres felt it first. One evening, while meditating beneath the dying sun, her breath hitched, her body tensed. Atrius reached for her, but she raised a trembling hand to stop him. "The Force, it's warning me." He frowned. "About what?" She opened her eyes. They glistened with something he had never seen in her before. "Terror. Attachment leads to loss. Loss leads to fear. Fear leads to a—" "Don't finish that," he said sharply. But she did. "The very thing you've been trying not to become." Her voice wasn't accusing. It wasn't afraid of him. It was afraid for him. Atrius looked away, jaw tight. "The Jedi taught you that. Not the Force." "It taught me to listen," she said, reaching for him. "And right now the Force is telling me this path has a cost we don't see yet." He pulled his hand back before she could touch him. The gesture hurt her. He saw it. But it hurt him too. "What cost?" he asked. She swallowed. "You. Me. Both of us." The silence that followed was colder than the desert wind. Atrius stood slowly, pacing across the sand. "I lived my whole life with nothing. Pain was the only thing that stayed. If something else finally exists, something that doesn't break me, why should I fear it?" "Because," Ceres whispered, rising to her feet, "love makes you vulnerable, and power makes you blind." He shot back. They stared at each other for a long time, two broken souls whose pieces had finally learned how to fit, now wrestling with the fear of what holding on might cost. Then Ceres stepped forward, not boldly, not confidently, but with the hesitation of someone who knows they are crossing a line they can never retreat from. "Atrius," she said softly, "I don't want to lose you." He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. Because the Force trembled around them, carrying a truth he was finally willing to face. He didn't want to lose her either. And in that fragile confession, understood without words, the galaxy shifted. For the first time in his life, Atrius had something he could not defend with a blade. Something that made him stronger. Something that made him weak. A love the Force had not forbidden, but had warned would break them both. They never had a chance to say goodbye. The sky was clear that night. No ships, no warnings, just stars. Atrius had risen early. He'd felt something in the Force shift, a faint pulse, like the slowing of a heartbeat before death. He didn't tell Ceres, not out of secrecy, but because he didn't want to make it real. She smiled that morning, the way she only did when the wind was calm and the sky didn't burn. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she passed him, still barefoot, still trusting the silence they had built together. She didn't know it would be the last time. The first shot came from orbit. Silent, precise. A Republic gunship cloaked in sensor-quiet technology dropped through the atmosphere without alert. It fired once into the ground beside their shelter. A warning, not a kill. Ceres was the target. Atrius ran toward the crater, sabers already in hand. But by the time he reached the edge, she was gone. They hadn't killed her. They had taken her. The Force screamed through his body. Not with rage, with terror. He stood at the edge of the crater, dust swirling around his feet, heat from the blast still burning the ground. Her scent lingered in the wind. Her presence flickered like a candle just blown out. Gone, but not dead. He fell to his knees, fists clenched, the sand beneath him shuddering with energy. He tried to see her through the Force, through memory, through anything, but it was like trying to reach a star that had already gone dark. For hours, he said nothing. He moved nothing, until night fell. The stars above Arjuna 9 had always been beautiful, cold, quiet, ancient. That night, they were unbearable, because he knew she was out there, somewhere, in chains, in silence, and maybe, by now, in fear. The Sith would not have taken her. The Jedi would not have accepted her. Only one faction in the galaxy had the resources to remove someone that carefully. The Republic. And if they had found her, they had found him too. He walked into the desert, eyes to the stars, voice low. She never hurt you. There was no answer, only the slow drift of starlight on sand. She chose to leave you behind. She chose me. Still silence. He raised his hands, and the Force responded. The dunes around him lifted. Rock split. The ground groaned beneath his feet. Storms began to rise, not of wind, but of power. His power, fed by grief, sharpened by betrayal. He had bent the Force before, but now it bent to him. He wasn't calling for Ceres. He was making a promise. I will find her, he whispered. And if you try to stop me, the sky pulsed. I will burn everything you built. His sabers ignited, not in defiance. In mourning, he carved a symbol into the cliffside above their shelter, twin circles, one fractured, one whole. No words, no names, just a memory made permanent in stone. Then he left Arjuna the 9s behind. No ceremony, no trace. The stars above him no longer offered light. They were witnesses, complicit. He did not know where they had taken her, but the Force would lead him. It always did. What he had found on that moon was not just love. It was clarity, a reason. And for a man who had been forged by pain, tempered by silence, and trained by no one, that was the most dangerous thing of all. There were no scouts, no allies, no plan, only a name, a system, a faint signal buried beneath layers of scrambled transmissions. Atrius followed it like a blade drawn across his chest, not because he believed it would lead him to her, but because doing nothing would be a second kind of death. The Force gave him fragments, visions of metal holes, Jedi robes in motion, a voice trying to speak through static and light. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He moved from system to system, cutting through resistance like smoke. Jedi, Sith, Republic, he no longer cared who stood in his way. They had taken her. That was enough. The first strike came on Doran, a Jedi transport refueling in the mountain cities. He landed before dawn, stepped through the blast doors alone, and demanded a name. They didn't answer, so he gave them silence in return. 3 knights fell, not killed, disarmed, broken. One whispered something before losing consciousness. We gave her sanctuary. The second strike was louder. A Jedi enclave on Dantooine, small, hidden, but watched by the Order's outer rim guardians. Atrius walked through its gates unannounced. The masters ordered him to leave. He stayed. They sent students to escort him out. Only one returned, carrying another message. She is not your prisoner, she is one of us. He didn't believe it. Not because it was impossible, but because it would destroy him. If it was true. He moved faster now, hunting records, intercepting signals. Through shadow networks, he tracked transports registered under false names. Through corrupted Republic archives, he found Jedi communications scrubbed from official records. One kept reappearing. Corvala, a moon near the mid-rim, not known for war, known for hiding what shouldn't be seen. He descended without warning. The Jedi outpost there had no fortress, no towers, just a half-buried temple grown from the stone. A sanctuary built for healing. The guards were light. Their minds were open. It was not a place of defense. It was a place of trust. He broke through the gates before the first alarm sounded. He didn't speak, didn't threaten. He simply moved forward like gravity, like fire, like the Force itself had given up trying to contain him. Padawans tried to reason with him. A healer stepped in front of him. Atrius didn't raise his blade, but the Force moved through him, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious, heart slowed by pressure alone. Then he saw her, Ceres. She stood at the far end of the hall. No chains, no guards, no fear. Her robes were white again. Not Sith, not exiled Jedi. The world slowed. He didn't know what to say. Not yet. His hands trembled. One saber was already half-lit. He took a step forward, and the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't relief. It wasn't love. It was guilt. The Force cracked inside him. A soundless break. Not from betrayal. From understanding. She hadn't been taken. She had chosen to leave. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just looked at him. That was the worst part. Not the silence, not the pain. The certainty. Ceres wasn't confused. She wasn't under duress. Her stance was balanced. Her presence was calm. And behind her, Jedi healers and temple guards waited uncertain, but prepared. He lowered his saber just slightly. You didn't call for help, he said. She didn't answer. You could have sent a message. Still, she said nothing. The Force between them was still there, but muted like a wound too deep to bleed. Her connection to him hadn't vanished. It had simply changed. It recoiled where once it reached. Atrius stepped closer, and that's when she finally spoke. I didn't want you to find me. The words weren't cruel. They were kind, and they cut deeper than any blade. He stopped walking. I thought you were taken. I wasn't. His breath caught. His chest tightened not from anger, but from something worse. Doubt. You left, he said. She nodded once. I had to. Why? Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Because what we became, it was never meant to last. He didn't understand. He did. He didn't want to. You said you didn't want to lose me, he said. I didn't, she replied. But I was already losing myself. A Jedi Knight stepped forward from the shadows. Younger, confident. His hand hovered near his saber. She's not going with you, he said. Atrius didn't look at him. This wasn't about him. He looked at her. Was any of it real? Cerys's lips parted, trembling. Her voice cracked for the first time. All of it. That should have brought him peace. It didn't. Because love, without loyalty, was still loss. The younger Jedi misread his silence. He stepped forward again, too eager, too brave. You've done enough, he said. This ends now. He reached for his saber. Atrius moved first. Not out of rage. Out of grief. The red blade ignited like a scream, slashing across the room before anyone could react. The younger Jedi crumpled to the floor, alive but broken. Two more moved to intercept. Atrius didn't hesitate. He became motion. Sabers flashed, walls cracked, bodies fell. The force surged through him, not wild, but focused, narrowed into the shape of heartbreak. Every strike was precise. Every step brought him closer to her. Stop, Cerys shouted. Please. He stopped, because it was her. And that meant something. Even now. Blood stained the stone floor. The air smelled of plasma and fear. The Jedi had withdrawn, retreating into the inner sanctum. Only Cerys remained, standing in front of him with her blade drawn. She didn't raise it. But she didn't lower it either. You can't keep doing this, she said softly. You can't kill every answer that hurts. I didn't come to kill, he said. I came to save you. I don't need saving. That, more than anything, broke him. Because she meant it. Because she believed it. He stepped back, and the force pulled away, not from her, from him. Something inside him cracked, quiet, final, like the snapping of a thread that had been pulled too tightly for too long. He turned without a word, leaving the temple behind. Not in defeat, in transformation. The man who had come to find her had not survived the whole. That man was gone. And something else, something colder, walked out beneath the temple lights. He didn't remember leaving the temple. One moment he was standing beneath the shattered archway. The next, he was walking through the ruins of the outer courtyard, his steps soundless, his thoughts buried beneath the weight of silence. The night felt colder. The force felt farther. He didn't ignite his saber again. He didn't need to. No one followed him. They had seen enough. So had he. He reached the edge of the cliff, overlooking Corvalla's eastern basin. Below, ships blinked in and out of orbit, like stars being born and extinguished. The city was alive, and none of it mattered. Atrius sat in the dust, not to rest, to feel. He waited for anger, but it didn't come, not the way it used to. He had raged for Cerys, hunted for her, killed for her. He had disobeyed the Force itself to try and reclaim what they had. And she had looked at him like a lesson she was learning to forget. He buried his face in his hands. The Force did not whisper comfort. It didn't offer purpose. It held up a mirror, and he saw himself, a child born beneath rubble, a slave carved in darkness, a warrior trained by silence. A Sith who knelt to no master. And now, a man who had nothing left to lose. He didn't feel rage, he felt release. The illusion was broken. He hadn't fought to save her. He had fought to hold on to something he couldn't admit was already gone. He had built a life around the idea that she needed him. That love could survive on pain alone. But Ceres had walked away. Because love without peace was still a prison. The Jedi had taught her to fear attachment. The Sith would have twisted her into a weapon. He had offered her neither. And still, it wasn't enough. Not because he failed her, but because he didn't know who he was without her. He stood slowly, eyes still fixed on the horizon. And in that stillness, the truth settled. He had never truly belonged to the Jedi. He had never truly served the Sith. And love, as fragile as it had been, had never truly healed him. It had only distracted him from what he already was. He looked down at his sabers. Their red cores flickered faintly in the dark. Imperfect, unstable, beautiful in their brokenness. Like him, but something had changed. He no longer needed them to be weapons. He needed them to be a message. He climbed into his ship silent, rusted, forgotten by every registry. It had no name, no transponder. It was a ghost, and now, so was he. He opened a secure channel, one only Sith warlords used to broadcast territorial claims. He said nothing. He only transmitted a single symbol, a mask. Not real, not worn, just imagined a dark crimson shape, marked by angular lines, its mouth covered, its eyes narrowed like a thing carved from grief. He pressed send, and somewhere in the mid-rim, a Sith Lord saw it and paused. Somewhere in the core, a Jedi Council member recognized the signal's origin and shivered. No name, no voice, no threat, just a symbol. And in the Force, a ripple moved outward, cold, slow, steady. A storm no longer built on fury, but clarity. He wasn't Atrius anymore. That name belonged to someone who still hoped. And hope had been torn from him quietly, with kindness, by the only person he had ever trusted. Now there was only the man who remained. Unclaimed, unforgiving, unseen. Not a Sith, not a Jedi, just a shadow, preparing to become myth. He didn't choose the name. The galaxy chose it for him. Atrius disappeared after Corvala vanished into hyperspace without leaving a trace. No ports logged him. No outpost saw him land. Even the Force dimmed around him, as if unsure whether he remained among the living. But he wasn't hiding. He was becoming. The ship drifted through uncharted space, running on fumes and instinct. He spent days in silence, staring at his reflection in the darkened view screen. Not the face he knew. Not the one Ceres had touched beneath the red glow of Arjuna's sunset. This face was sharper, colder, alive only because pain had refused to let it die. He opened the storage compartment beneath the cockpit. Inside lay scraps of armor taken from fallen Sith. Fragments of ceremonial masks stolen from Coraban, wires torn from failed holocrons. He touched each piece with a strange reverence. Not admiration, recognition. They were broken. So was he. He began to forge. He worked without rest, guided not by training but necessity, shaping metal with his bare hands when tools failed. Sparks burned his skin. Heat bled through the cabin. He didn't stop. He didn't feel anything but purpose. Bit by bit, the shape emerged. Not a helmet, not a crown, a face. The mask was crimson deep, bruised red, carved with sharp lines that hid the mouth and elongated the cheekbones. Its eyes were narrow slits, angled downward in permanent grief. Not rage, not hunger, grief. He held it up to the dim cabin light. This was not the face of Atrius. Atrius had loved. Atrius had believed. Atrius had broken. This was the face of what survived him. When he set the mask aside, He touched his lightsabers, both cracked, both unstable, both born from loss. He placed them beside the mask, palms resting on the metal. His breathing slowed, his heart steadied. This was no longer a rescue, no longer vengeance. This was clarity. The Force gathered around him, not warm, not cold, but empty. An emptiness that promised freedom. An emptiness that cared nothing for love, loyalty, or the fragile memories of who he once was. He whispered into that void, "I am done being found." The ship jerked suddenly as it exited hyperspace above a barren moon. He hadn't set a course. The nav system had not been touched. The Force had chosen the destination. The moon was dead gray rock, fractured ridges, and a quiet so absolute it felt carved. A place where no one lived, no one watched, no one cared. Perfect. He descended through the thin atmosphere and stepped onto the surface, mask in one hand, blades in the other. The wind gusted weakly across the emptiness, lifting dust in slow spirals. Here, he could bury Atrius. Not with ceremony, with acceptance. He knelt on the cold stone. A single memory struck him: Sarah's, smiling as she watched him meditate, whispering that the Force wasn't only pain. He let the memory pass. Then he placed his sabers on the ground, placed the mask before them, and lowered his head. He didn't mourn. He decided. Atrius died on Corvala. The wind shifted. Something else walks now. The mask lifted in his hands, weightless in the Force. The blades rose beside it, igniting with a violent hum that illuminated the empty landscape in crimson light. When he put the mask on, it did not feel foreign. It felt like truth. The sabers fell silent at his sides. The Force around him recoiled not in fear, but in recognition. A wound had returned to the galaxy. A myth had taken form. A shadow without lineage. A Sith without doctrine. A ghost carved from the ashes of loss. The Crimson Ghost. He did not chart the course. The Force did. Atrius had vanished from the galaxy, but not into death, into directionless motion, into places where hyperspace routes failed and where signals became noise. His ship drifted through black, carried by the pull of something ancient. Not fate, not destiny. A summons. There was no starlight beyond the rim, no visible points to navigate, only a slow hum beneath the hull, a low vibration that grew stronger with every system crossed, every planet passed in silence. The stars thinned, then they disappeared entirely. And still, he continued. The mask stayed on, the sabers stayed silent. There was nothing left in the galaxy for him. Nothing but myth and memory. The name Atrius had died with Ceres. The Crimson Ghost had no need for names, only purpose. Eventually, the ship stopped responding. The coordinates collapsed into static. The controls dimmed. The lights flickered. And the Force changed. It didn't vanish. It bent, twisted. The deeper he moved into the unknown, the more it stopped feeling like the Force at all. There was no light, no dark, just weight. A pressure that filled the space behind his eyes, whispering in tones too deep for language. Then, without warning, the ship dropped from hyperspace. There was no planet. Not yet. Just a shadow. A shape that shouldn't have existed. A sphere of obsidian drifting between stars that had long since died. No atmosphere. No orbit. No heat signature. And yet, it pulled at him with a gravity that wasn't physical. A presence too ancient to scream. He descended. The ship groaned as if it understood what waited below. He landed on black stone. Solid, cold, lightless. When the hatch opened, there was no wind, no sound. The vacuum should have killed him. But it didn't. Because this place was not dead. It was waiting. He stepped out onto the surface, sabers at his side, mask tight to his face. The ground was jagged, like broken glass carved into a planet's skin. Strange symbols older than the Sith, older than the Republic, older than known time glowed faintly beneath the rock. Not carved, grown. The air smelled wrong. Except there was no air, and still, he breathed. In the distance, the temple stood. It wasn't built. It had risen, grown upward in defiance of natural law. Shaped from the same dark stone that covered the planet. Its towers spiraled inwards, not upwards, like hands clasping around a secret. No windows, no doors, no lights. He walked. With each step, the force fell further behind. Not gone, but unreachable, like a voice muffled by walls too thick for sound. Whatever power existed here, it did not come from the force. It came from before it. At the base of the structure, he stopped. There were no markings to suggest entry, no seams, no hinges, but his presence alone was enough. The wall before him trembled. It melted. Stone slid away like liquid shadow, revealing an entrance shaped like an open mouth, jagged and wide, waiting to be fed. He did not hesitate. Inside, the silence became absolute. It pressed against his chest like gravity, pulling him downward even as he stood. The architecture made no sense, angles that shouldn't meet. Stairs that descended without turning, walls that seemed to breathe. His sabers trembled at his sides, not in warning, in fear, because even they remembered something Atrius did not. This place had no name in the archives, but the dead had whispered of it once. The Temple of Dead Names. The first thing he felt inside the temple was not fear. It was recognition. As if some forgotten part of him had walked these halls long before he was born, long before the Sith, long before Jedi, long before the Force learned how to divide itself into light and shadow. The walls were carved from black stone that reflected no light, yet still shimmered faintly, as though memories were trapped inside. Each surface was covered in symbols, patterns that moved when he blinked. Shifting positions like constellations, rearranging themselves in the dark. He reached out with the force. Nothing answered. It was like throwing sound into a well without a bottom. The force didn't resist him. It simply wasn't there. He felt untethered, as though the universe itself had forgotten him. Most beings would have fled. Atrius walked deeper. His footsteps echoed not with sound, but with vibration. Soft pulses beneath the stone, following his movement. The temple was reacting to him, studying him, measuring the shape of the thing behind his mask. A corridor stretched before him, impossibly long, sloping downward with no visible end. At intervals, alcoves lined the walls. Inside, each alcove stood a figure, stone bodies shaped like people, but without faces. Their heads were smooth. Their hands clutched objects worn away by time. Blades, scrolls, broken helms. He paused before one. Its hands were empty. Its chest bore a single mark, a vertical crack from throat to sternum, as if something had split it open from the inside. Atrius stared. This was not a tomb. It was a record, a history of those who had come before him, those who had walked without masters, those who had died without names, those the Force itself had abandoned. The deeper he went, the more the air grew thick, not with heat or sound, but with memory. Ghosts lingered here, not as spirits, but as impressions burned into the stone by suffering older than language. Eventually, the corridor ended in a vast chamber. The ceiling rose so high it disappeared into shadow. The floor was covered with black dust, like volcanic ash, but finer, lighter, almost soft under his boots. Rows of monoliths stood around the perimeter, each covered in runes too old for recognition. And at the center lay a sarcophagus, massive, closed, carved from the same dark stone. Lines of energy pulsed faintly across its surface, slow, almost like breathing. Atrius approached. He placed one hand on the ancient lid. The stone felt warm. For the first time since entering the temple, the force stirred, but not as power, not as guidance, as memory, pain, despair, hunger, a hunger that dwarfed the Sith, a despair that outlived the Jedi, a pain that predated the force itself. Atrius staggered back, clutching his chest. His heartbeat raced, not from fear, but from understanding. Whatever lay inside this sarcophagus had not been laid to rest. It had been sealed away. He steadied himself. The walls around him flickered, not visibly, not physically, but through the sense behind his eyes, his awareness shifting, widening, seeing layers of the temple that normal vision couldn't reach. There were names carved into the monoliths, but they weren't written. They were impressions, emotions, echoes. The dead here did not have names. They had losses, losses so great their identities collapsed into fragments, then into symbols, then into silence. He reached out to one monolith, cold, then warmth, then something like weeping. He pulled his hand away. For the first time, he wondered if even the Sith would have feared this place, if the ancient lords had found it and fled, if this temple was not meant to be discovered, not because it held power, but because it held the memory of what power had destroyed. He turned back toward the sarcophagus. Its faint pulse continued, slow, steady, alive, a tomb older than the dark, and perhaps older than the thing that created it. Atrius stepped closer, and the chamber whispered, not into his ears, but into his bones. Not all who seek power survive knowing its origin. He did not speak. There was no one to hear him. The chamber of the dead had no voice, and yet it taught him more than any master ever had. Not through words, through weight, through pressure, through the unbearable stillness of what could not die. Atrius sat before the sarcophagus, cross-legged, sabers laid bare in front of him. They hissed when he placed them on the stone, both cracked, both humming weakly, their unstable cores flickering like dying stars. They had served him for years, forged in exile, powered by fury, stained with memory. But they were not enough anymore. Not here. He unbound the hilt slowly, setting the parts out with care. Wires, crystals, scorched emitters, scattered remnants of a journey carved through shadow. Each piece still carried memory. Each fragment still bled purpose. But none of it belonged to him anymore. Not to what he had become. Not to what he was becoming. He closed his eyes, and in the silence of that tomb, the force did not answer. It watched. For hours he sat unmoving, listening not with ears, but with instinct. The temple breathed around him, stone walls contracting and expanding in ways that defied time. He felt the distant pulse of the sarcophagus, steady and unchanging, a heartbeat not his own. Then he opened his palms. The kyber shards trembled. They did not sing as they once had. They groaned, fractured, reluctant, aware of what they were about to become. Atrius didn't force them. He didn't shape them. He offered them choice. And they responded. One shard rose slowly into the air, crackling with crimson light. The other followed, its glow uneven, twitching with instability. Atrius extended his hands, and the crystals settled above them, one to the left, one to the right. Not balanced, not equal, but united. He reached into the pile of hilt fragments. No symmetry, no elegance. He selected pieces that felt right. A broken emitter from his earliest saber. A grip torn from a fallen Sith. A power cell, half melted during his escape from Coraban. All of it meaningless. Until now, he began to rebuild. Not to design, to remember. He wasn't crafting weapons. He was telling a story, the only one that mattered. One of survival. Of exile. Of silence that screamed and wounds that never healed. His hands worked slowly, unshaken by the cold. He finished the first hilt before the stars shifted outside the temple. Then the second. He did not test them. Not yet. Instead, he stood, sabers in hand, and walked to the center of the chamber. The sarcophagus pulsed louder now. Not faster, not angrier, just closer. As if acknowledging him, as if recognizing something familiar. He ignited both blades at once. The room did not light up. It dimmed. The red glow from the new sabers was not light, it was absorption. As if the blades didn't shine, but instead devoured what dared surround them. They were not beautiful. They were not precise. They were true. Their color wasn't just crimson. It was ruin. He swung one slow, controlled. The blades howled, not from imbalance, from memory. They remembered Jeddah. They remembered Saris. They remembered the name Atrius. And they rejected all of it. He turned back to the sarcophagus and bowed, not in submission, in acknowledgement. This temple had taught him nothing, because what he needed to know was already inside him. It had always been there. He had just never listened. Now, with these new sabers in hand, and the Force long behind him, he understood. He had not reforged weapons. He had reforged himself. And the next time he ignited these blades in battle, the galaxy would feel what silence could become. He did not sleep. Not in the temple. Not afterward. Not again. There were no dreams left to visit. Only echoes. He left the sarcophagus untouched. Whatever lay inside it remained sealed. Atrius had found what he came for, not power, not knowledge, but the absence of both. A silence so complete it became a mirror. And in that silence, he had reforged more than blades. He had buried everything else. The man who had loved Saris. The warrior who once believed he could change the Sith. The child who still searched for meaning in pain. All of them had followed him here. None of them left. He walked out of the temple the same way he entered. Alone, but lighter. The dust didn't cling to him. The air no longer choked. Even the black sun above the dead world seemed dimmer now, as if the temple had accepted his presence and no longer needed to test him. His ship was still there, still cold, still silent. He entered without hesitation. The engines came alive without a single command. The controls responded as if they'd waited, watching him through the long dark. He set no coordinates. The ship already knew the way. As the temple faded into shadow behind him, he felt the Force reach toward him like a thread trying to reconnect with what had once belonged to it. He let it try. But he didn't reach back. He had passed beyond it. There was no light waiting to redeem him, no dark to pull him further in. Only truth. He had walked into the heart of silence, and silence had spoken. It had told him that legacy was a lie, that names were graves, that the galaxy would forget him unless he burned something into it that could never be erased. Not a kingdom, not a philosophy, not a school of thought or line of succession. A wound. That was what he had become now. A wound in the Force. A lesson not taught but felt. when Jedi touched the edge of the unknown and recoiled, when Sith delved too deep into secrets and heard their own names whispered back. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was the memory of what shadows tried to hide. The Crimson Ghost. His mask waited for him in the cockpit. He lifted it slowly, as though lifting a second face. When he placed it on, it no longer felt heavy. It felt inevitable. His sabers sat beside him. Quiet. He did not ignite them. He did not need to. Their hum already echoed through the path ahead. He looked once at the stars beyond the viewport, cold, distant, endless. Then he looked away, because there was nothing left out there for him. Only the trail he would carve. And behind him, left buried beneath stone and silence, remained everything he had once feared losing. A name, a voice, a soul. He did not mourn them. He honored them by leaving them behind, forever. He did not enter the galaxy quietly. He tore his way back into it. The first system to witness his return was Thalor, an outer rim world known only for trade routes and old mining contracts. A place with no strategic value, no Jedi presence, no Sith history. And still it burned. Witnesses spoke later of a ship that arrived without a signature, a vessel that flickered against sensors like a dying star. Some swore it wasn't a ship at all, but a shadow wearing light the wrong way. When it descended, the sky dimmed. When it landed, the ground shook. And when the figure stepped out, every animal for 10 kilometers fell silent. The Crimson Ghost had returned. Word spread faster than hyperlanes could carry it. A masked figure wielding twin crimson blades, cutting through militia checkpoints and corporate security forces with movements too exact to be feral, too cold to be human. He didn't kill out of rage. He didn't destroy out of pleasure. He erased every symbol of control, every marker of power, every flag that pretended it mattered. Atrius wasn't fighting a war. He was removing a galaxy that had never recognized him. Thalor's governor, terrified, sent a distress call to the Jedi, not because he trusted them, but because they were the only ones who still believed monsters could be reasoned with. The Jedi did not send a battalion. They sent only 3. Master Renkai, Knight Elaris, Padawan Vas, all tasked with the same mission. Determine if the Crimson Ghost was Atrius. If so, stop him. If not, protect the outer rim. They found him in the ruins of the city square. Bodies around him. Buildings half collapsed. Dust floating like ash. He stood in the center, sabers unlit, staring at a toppled statue once a symbol of Republic aid, now broken across the stone like a forgotten promise. Master Renkai approached first. Atrius, he said quietly, you don't have to do this. The mask turned toward him, slowly, deliberately, like stone finding motion. Atrius is dead, the voice answered, cold, distorted, hollow. Padawan Vos stepped forward with youthful arrogance. Then who are you supposed to be? Atrius didn't answer. The silence was enough. Renkai lifted a cautious hand. If you continue on this path, the council will have no choice but to stop me. Atrius finished. His sabers ignited not with the unstable hiss of before, but with a deeper, almost soundless burn. The blades absorbed light, absorbed color. They were not weapons. They were voids. Elaris drew her saber, fear tightening her breath. Please, we're not your enemies. Atrius tilted his head. You became my enemy the moment you tried to name what I am. Renkai stepped between them, lowering his blade. Then tell us, what are you? For a moment, the wind stopped. Atrius didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the mask answered, I am what the Force forgot. He moved before the sentence finished. Not fast, not explosive, inevitable. Voss fell first disarmed, not dead, but broken in spirit. Elaris tried to shield him. Atrius slid past her defense and struck her saber arm, not severing it, but making sure she could no longer lift it. Ren Kai fought the longest. He was skilled, grounded, patient. Every strike was deliberate, every step a calculation of survival. But Atrius wasn't fighting technique. He was fighting purpose. Ren Kai's blade cracked under pressure that didn't make sense. His knees buckled. And still, Atrius didn't kill him. He simply leaned close enough for the mask to fill the Jedi's vision and whispered, "You cannot stop what has already returned." Then he walked away. No victory. No celebration. Only the beginning. By nightfall, the HoloNet spoke his name again, not Atrius, not the exile, not the heretic. The Crimson Ghost. And across the galaxy, both Jedi and Sith understood. This was not a war they could win. It was a reckoning. Atrius didn't march with armies. He didn't raise fleets. He never claimed territory or installed governors. And still, entire systems fell silent after his arrival. The galaxy didn't understand it at first. The Jedi called it terrorism. The Sith called it heresy. But neither label fit. What Atrius left behind weren't messages, they were ruins. Messages could be ignored. Ruins demanded explanation. He moved without pattern. One world in the mid-rim, another in the outer rim, then deep into wild space, only to reappear weeks later near the Hydean Way. The Crimson Ghost wasn't chasing power. He was hunting memory. On Varnak Prime, he destroyed a Jedi archive so ancient that even the Council had forgotten it still operated. When they returned to inspect the damage, they found every data crystal shattered, every manuscript turned to ash. Except one. A single fragment, untouched by fire, lay on the steps outside. It contained nothing of tactical use. No maps, no weaknesses. It held only one thing. His name, Atrius. Not his title, not the Crimson Ghost. Just the name he had buried long ago. And yet, he had spared it. It wasn't mercy. It was mockery. He wanted them to remember exactly what they had discarded. On Zoralus, a moon with no history of Jedi presence, he burned a Sith reliquary to the ground. A vault of ancient texts and blood-bound artifacts. He didn't keep a single item. He only left a word etched into the stone in blood-red script. Lies. The Sith Lords of that era, petty warlords, masquerading as philosophers, were furious. Not because they had lost relics, but because someone had dared challenge the narrative they had built atop bones. One of them, Darth Varnus, sent 12 assassins to hunt Atrius through the void between systems. They never returned, but their blades did. Each one arrived impaled in the stone floor of the Sith Academy on Coraban, arranged in a perfect circle around the statue of Marker Ragnos. The message was clear. The old ways had watched, and they had chosen him. Still, Atrius did not build a following. He did not record his teachings. He didn't care if others understood him, because there was no belief to share. Only fury, fury shaped by loss, loss shaped by betrayal, and betrayal shaped by the Jedi and Sith alike. World by world, he erased pieces of history, not indiscriminately, surgically, shrines that glorified Jedi sacrifice. Temples that rewrote Sith cruelty as honor, statues built to immortalize cowards, museums curated by the victors of dead wars. Atrius didn't destroy the past. He removed the lies that had replaced it. And with each act of erasure, the galaxy became quieter. Not in peace, in tension. Republic governors withdrew their forces from outer colonies, terrified he might appear. Sith warbands turned inward, afraid their next ritual site might vanish under his blade. Even Hutt space shifted, trading security for silence, because Atrius had become something no warlord ever could. Predictable in purpose, unstoppable in execution, and impossible to reason with. He never asked for anything, never spoke publicly, never justified a single act, which meant no one could negotiate with him. There was nothing to give, nothing he wanted, except one thing, to be unignored. And the only way to do that was to turn the galaxy into a graveyard of its own illusions. They didn't plan to create a new Jedi Order. They were only trying to survive. The galaxy Atrius left in his wake was not unified by terror, but by silence, not a peace won by diplomacy, but a stillness carved out by absence. In the ruins of temples, cities, and shrines, no side claimed victory. No side knew what came next. And in that vacuum, something unexpected grew. It began on Aram Prime. A moon shattered during the war between Atrius and the sector's local Jedi garrison. It was never meant to be remembered. But survivors gathered in the stone caverns beneath the surface, former Jedi, outcast Sith, and those with no name at all. They spoke not of the Force, but of the absence of it. One of them, a young Jedi Knight named Tene Solari, remembered Atrius not as a monster, but as a mirror. She had fought him once. She had survived, and she hadn't forgotten the look in his eyes behind that mask. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't power. It was grief. Ten began teaching again. Not the Jedi Code, not the Sith doctrine, but something simpler. How to listen to pain. How to let go of illusion. How to rebuild a life from the ashes of purpose. Others followed, not because she was powerful, but because she didn't pretend to have answers. They didn't call themselves Jedi at first. They had no temple, no robes, no council, only questions and firelight. But word spread of a gathering on Aram Prime, of Force sensitives who neither ruled nor obeyed, who studied the past not to restore it, but to learn what should never be repeated. Some Jedi exiles found their way there, believing they would reclaim purpose. They stayed because they found something better. Some Sith came seeking conquest or destruction. They left broken or changed. Ten's order had no name, no formal creed, but in time it gained something stronger. Survivors, men and women who had walked through the storms Atrius left behind and realized they could not go back to the way things were. Not to dogma, not to hierarchy, not to a war that never ended. One night, beneath the stars, a child asked her, "Are we Jedi?" Tene said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered, "Not yet." And that was enough. Word of the movement reached Atrius in time. Or perhaps he had always known. The Force didn't speak to him anymore, not as it once did. But echoes still reached him through the scars he left behind. He did not destroy them. He could have. He visited Aram Prime once, not in secrecy, not with sabers drawn. He walked through the outer rim of their caverns unnoticed, cloaked not in darkness but in memory. And when he stood beneath the stone ceiling where Tene taught, he didn't enter. He only watched from the shadows. She saw him. She didn't speak. Neither did he. After a time, he turned and left. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. Tene never confirmed his presence, but those who were there that night claimed something changed afterward. Not in doctrine, in tone. The Order, if it could be called that, stopped preparing for war. They began preparing for remembrance. They began training not to fight, but to endure, not to defend the Republic or bring balance to the Force, but to be the ones who would survive the next fire. Because in their hearts, they understood what even the Jedi had forgotten. The greatest legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what others choose to build from what remains. Atrius's last war did not end with a duel. It ended with a realization. Not his, the galaxy's. For years, he had been a blade carving scars across worlds, forcing civilizations to confront the lies they had built their histories upon. But he had never cared for conquest, never sought dominion, never tried to reshape the galaxy into something he could rule. He didn't want to rule it. He wanted it to remember him. And memory is more dangerous than any weapon. The final confrontation came on Helion Ridge, a monastery once shared by both Jedi and Sith scholars during a brief age of uneasy peace. A neutral ground meant for study, reflection, and the rare moments when neither side wished to spill blood. Atrius burned it. Not for strategy, for symbolism. The Jedi arrived too late to save the archives. The Sith arrived too late to claim the relics. They found only ashes and the crimson ghost sitting among them, mask reflecting the dying embers. He didn't lift his sabers when they drew theirs. He didn't stand when they approached. He only looked at the fire consuming the last fragments of a history neither side had ever truly understood. Master Renkai was among them. He stepped forward, breathing heavily, blade glowing in the smoke. "It doesn't have to end like this," he said. Atrius tilted his head. "It already has. You destroyed everything here," Renkai whispered. "All the knowledge, all the lessons." Atrius's voice was quiet. "Knowledge kept in cages becomes chains." A Sith warlord bared his teeth. "You could have taken these relics, used them." "I don't use ghosts," Atrius replied. "I become one." The flames rose higher. The Jedi and Sith approached from opposite sides, united only by necessity. It was the closest the two orders had stood without killing each other in generations. Atrius saw it. A rare moment of unity. He did not reward it. "You think you're here to kill me," he said softly. "But you're here to understand me." "We already do," a Sith spat. "No," Atrius whispered. "You understand the myth, not the memory." He rose slowly, sabers still unlit. "For years you feared my wrath, but wrath was never my purpose." Renkai tightened his grip. "Then what was?" Atrius looked at him through the mask. Reflection. Silence spread across the ridge. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if the flames themselves wished to hear the end. "You created me," Atrius said. "Not by teaching, not by shaping, but by forgetting." He pointed to the monastery ruins. "This is what you left behind. Not wisdom, not peace, just stories written to protect your pride." Neither side spoke. "They will remember you for this," Renkai said quietly. "As a monster." Atrius stepped forward. "No," he said. "They'll remember themselves." A strange peace settled over him. Not calm, not forgiveness, but clarity, the kind that comes only when every wound has hardened into truth. He raised his sabers. The Jedi prepared. The Sith braced. But Atrius did not strike them. He stabbed both blades downward into the stone beneath his feet. The ground erupted. Light tore through the monastery floor. Stone cracked, columns fell, dust swallowed the ridge. For one brief moment, the force surged not as light or dark, but as something raw, wild, ancient. An echo of the temple he had found in the void. A memory unleashed. Jedi and Sith alike were thrown back, struggling to maintain footing as the ridge split open. When the dust settled, the crimson ghost was gone. No body, no mask, no trace. Only 2 scorch marks where his sabers had struck, shaped like open eyes, staring upward. A warning, a message, a final truth. Atrius's last battle had not been fought to survive. It had been fought to be remembered. And from that day forward, whenever the Jedi or Sith spoke of him, they did so quietly. Because some ghosts don't fade, they wait. Atrius died the way he lived, unseen. No body was ever recovered. No grave was ever marked. The Force did not whisper his passing. It simply went quiet. But his sabers did not stay silent. When the monastery at Helion Ridge collapsed, the Jedi searched the ruins for survivors. They found broken stone, scorched earth, and dust carried on a wind that sounded almost like mourning. But in the deepest part of the crater, buried beneath a veil of ash, something glowed. 2 crimson blades, cold, unmoving, still ignited. They hummed with a slow, unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. Jedi Masters approached with caution, and even the strongest among them felt it. Not darkness, not corruption. Memory. Atrius's memory. The sabers flickered when touched, not in anger, but in recognition. As if they still remembered the hands that forged them, the pain that shaped them, the silence that completed them. No one could extinguish them. No one could lift them. The Force recoiled from them like a body rejecting a wound. So the Jedi did what Jedi always did with things they feared. They hid them. Deep within the vaults beneath Coruscant, behind seals older than the Clone Wars, the blades were locked away. Not to be studied, not to be purified, to be forgotten. But the Force remembers what the galaxy tries to bury. And Atrius's sabers were not dead. They were waiting. Centuries passed. Wars rose and crumbled. Empires burned, were reborn, and forgot why they ever feared the dark. But the vault was never truly sealed. In the time of Darth Desolus, a Padawan disappeared from the temple archives. She had been obsessed with forbidden relics, especially one file, fragmentary and corrupted, containing a single word, Atrius. They found her body days later in a meditation cell. Her lightsaber was shattered. Her thoughts, scattered and unfinished, spoke of a voice calling her deeper. The vault had been breached, but the sabers were still there, just a little closer to the surface. Years later, a Sith cultist in the aftermath of the new Sith Wars claimed he had dreamt of red teeth in the stone and followed the vision to ruins on Ossus. He returned broken, blind, trembling, whispering of a man with no face, whose memory burned louder than the Force itself. He never spoke again. He didn't need to. Those who came near him began to see things. A mask, a war, a love that turned to ash. None could explain it. None could trace its origin. And none knew his name. But the pattern was clear. The sabers had begun to dream. Or worse, to remember. And like all memories made of pain, they didn't fade. They spread. Not as legends, as infection. Atrius's rage had no mind of its own, but his story did. And stories can possess the living. The Jedi never spoke of him. The Sith denied he existed. But the galaxy remembered. Not in truth, in legend. On the outer rim, near the edges of wild space, smugglers whispered of a Sith who carved through the Clone Wars without ever choosing a side. They called him the Crimson Wraith. No one knew where the name came from. But everyone agreed he wore no face and left no bodies. Only silence. In the archives of the rebuilt Jedi Temple on Ossus, A knight once found a fragment buried under failed encryption. It was a warning from centuries past, unsigned, unsourced, but unmistakable. It read, "If the red sabers hum in the dark, do not speak. Do not remember his name. The echo listens." The knight dismissed it as nonsense. That night, she dreamt of a man staring at a grave that didn't exist. The Hutts tried to auction off one of the sabers. The transaction never completed. Every buyer vanished. And in a temple far beneath the sands of Coraban, a young Sith acolyte found the phrase, "The Sith without a master," scrawled in blood beneath a sealed wall. He asked his instructor, who wrote it. The instructor said nothing, but his hand trembled for the rest of the lesson. Atrius had no holocrons, no titles, no tomb, only scars left on the Force. And scars, once made, cannot be erased. They can only be passed on. The Force does not forget. Even when names are lost, even when records are erased, even when history folds in on itself, the pain remains. Long after Atrius vanished, Jedi younglings would wake in the night, clutching their chests, unable to breathe. They spoke of red light, of screaming metal, of a man with no eyes, only fury. The Jedi Masters said it was nothing. The younglings never believed them. On a moon in the unknown regions, a crew of explorers once heard humming beneath the stone. No one else was there. They left without finishing their excavation. Decades later, when a Sith warlord cracked the moon apart in search of ancient power, he found no relics. Only a message, etched in scorched obsidian. "I was the last war, and you are already forgotten." Some say it was fake. Others say the warlord stopped speaking after that day. The crimson sabers still surface, one on Ord Mantell, one on Nar Shaddaa, always separate, never claimed, because anyone who touches them hears his voice. Not words, just sorrow. The story of Darth Atrius did not end in battle. It ended in echo, a lesson passed not by teachings, but by trauma. He did not create a legacy. He became a wound, and even now the Force shivers when it remembers him.